Have you ever wondered what secrets the world's rarest artifacts hold, the ones that have survived thousands, even millions of years? Welcome to Unearthed Secrets, where we explore history's most mysterious treasures and the stories they carry. Make sure to hit subscribe, give this video a like, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. The stone that wove dreams. The desert stretches endlessly, its sands shifting like slow-moving rivers beneath a sky that seems to hold eternity in its pale blue gaze. The wind carries with it the faint scent of earth and stone, the aroma of a land that has held memory longer than any living being can comprehend. The stone that wove dreams rests among these sands, ancient beyond reckoning, and yet present, alive in ways that cannot be measured by ordinary eyes or understood by ordinary thought. The carvings, faintly glowing in the fading light, are intricate spirals, looping lines, and jagged shapes that hint at forms both known and unknown. Each mark has been made with intention, a deliberate shaping of the surface that captures more than shape. It captures essence, motion, and something that might be called thought. Travelers who approach the stone report a sensation at first, subtle, a pull at the edges of the mind, as though the stone reaches across time and space to recognize the presence of those who draw near. It is not a hostile recognition, it is not judgmental, it is patient, quiet, observant, like a river that has seen countless seasons yet flows without concern. Those who linger too long describe a strange fluidity in perception. The line between self and environment becomes soft, colors seem more vivid, shadows carry meaning, and sounds emerge that have no source. The wind over the rocks, the distant cries of desert birds, the subtle scratching of sand against stone, all become part of an unseen symphony. Helena Drost, the archaeologist who first documented the stone in the late 1970s, wrote at length about her experiences. She described how the stone seemed to inhabit her dreams the night she slept beside it, how she awoke with visions still shimmering in her mind. She felt that she had glimpsed a narrative older than human memory, a record of thought that had no need for words or language. In those dreams, animals long extinct moved gracefully across the desert plains, not merely as creatures but as carriers of knowledge, as messengers of a world in which every life and every thought was interconnected. Spirals became rivers, jagged lines became mountains, and the patterns on the stone unfolded into landscapes that existed both in the mind and in a space beyond the mind. Local people speak of the stone in hushed tones, warning of its quiet persistence. They say that if one arrives with arrogance, it will ignore you. If one arrives with impatience, it will seem inert. But if one arrives with stillness, with openness, with a willingness to observe and reflect, the stone begins its work. It does not speak in words, it does not gesture. It simply is, and its presence draws the mind into a state of subtle awareness, where the ordinary rules of thought are loosened. Those who spend the night near it experience dreams unlike any other. They report seeing histories that are not their own, witnessing events that may have occurred thousands of years ago, or perhaps in realms entirely outside conventional time. They feel connections with lives and beings they have never known, as though the stone has touched the deepest parts of consciousness and shown them a glimpse of something universal. The carvings themselves are remarkable, not only for their age, but for their precision and subtlety. Lines carved millimeters deep can catch light in astonishing ways, creating the illusion of movement as the sun travels across the sky. Geometric patterns seem to shimmer and shift, forming images that can only be perceived when the observer allows the gaze to relax. When attention softens and stretches, shapes appear, dissolve, and reappear, giving the impression of a living language, a language that communicates through perception and experience rather than syntax or grammar. Helena observed these changes carefully, noting them in meticulous detail in her journal. She described one morning when dawn broke slowly over the desert, casting long shadows across the carvings. At a certain angle, a series of spirals aligned perfectly with the horizon, forming the silhouette of an animal that did not exist in her known world. It was a creature that combined elements of lion, antelope, and bird, moving in a way that suggested both flight and grounded strength. She felt as though the stone had created this vision specifically for her. A message conveyed without words, an invitation to see beyond ordinary perception. The stone's influence is subtle, yet profound. Visitors often feel time stretching, the hours elongating in ways that defy normal measurement. A few moments can feel like hours, hours can feel like minutes, and dreams weave seamlessly into waking thought. Some people have claimed that after leaving the stone, they experience a heightened awareness of patterns in the world, of connections between events and objects, of subtle movements in the air or shifts in light that go unnoticed by others. It is as though the stone imparts not knowledge but a method of perception, a way to tune the mind to the hidden harmonies of existence. Nights near the stone are transformative. The desert cools rapidly, and the air becomes so still that the faintest sound resonates deeply. The patterns of the petroglyphs appear to glow faintly in moonlight, not with any luminescence the eye can detect, but with a presence that is felt. Some travelers have reported hearing soft whispers, as though the stone itself is speaking directly to the subconscious. These are not words in any conventional sense. They are impressions, sensations, suggestions of thought, fleeting images that vanish if grasped too tightly. Sleep near the stone is unlike sleep elsewhere. Dreams flow in continuous sequences that blend memory, imagination, and something ancient and collective. Visitors describe walking through landscapes of stone and sky, seeing animals and people who seem simultaneously familiar and unknowable, experiencing emotions that are profound and yet unnameable. Helena's notes recount nights where she dreamed of entire civilizations rising and falling, of rituals and journeys and migrations, all intertwined in a tapestry that the stone seems to have woven for those who enter its proximity. The stone does not compel or direct, it invites and enfolds. It requires patience, openness, and quietude. Those who attempt to rush it, to force understanding, often find only confusion or exhaustion. Those who wait, who breathe slowly, who allow the mind to relax, often find themselves touched in ways that resonate for years. It is a dialogue without words, a conversation in which time, space, and thought are fluid. Even the animals of the desert seem aware of the stone. Birds circle overhead with measured flight. Small mammals pause at a distance, and insects trace slow arcs across the sand, their movement somehow part of the larger rhythm. The stone does not disturb, it harmonizes. It is a presence as constant as the earth itself, yet infinitely subtle. Over centuries, many have visited, and few have left unchanged. Scholars, travelers, dreamers, and wanderers all describe experiences that cannot be fully explained. Each person's encounter is unique, yet patterns emerge. A deepening of perception, a flow of thought that feels more natural, a sense of connection to life beyond the immediate self. The stone that wove dreams is patient. It has watched the desert and the sky, the winds and the rain, for untold millennia. It will continue to watch, long after those who come and go are themselves forgotten. Its carvings hold the echoes of countless minds, shaping and reshaping in subtle ways, inviting those who approach to become part of the continuum, to touch the edges of a dream older than any recorded history, to experience the quiet weaving of thought, perception, and imagination into a tapestry that is at once personal and eternal. The King Who Painted Heaven on Earth. The King Who Painted Heaven on Earth, Ezana of Axum, ruled a land where the sky pressed down in endless shades of blue, and the earth stretched out in vast plains, dotted with jagged stone outcrops and fertile valleys. From the moment he was born, there was a sense around him, a quiet hum, that seemed to echo the ancient memory of the land itself, as though the hills and rivers knew that he would shape more than cities and armies, that he would shape perception, faith, and the very experience of the world around him. His youth was spent wandering among obelisks and the remnants of older temples, tracing the carvings in stone with small fingers, feeling the texture, imagining the lives of the people who had raised these monuments long before his own memory could stretch back. The winds that swept across Axum whispered to him stories carried from distant lands, from traders who came across deserts and seas, from priests who spoke in tongues he would later understand as sacred, and from travelers whose footsteps pressed echoes of other kingdoms into the soil. Even as a young boy, Ezana's mind did not wander only on the games of children. He considered the patterns of the clouds, the way shadows fell across stones, the ripple of water in distant streams, and he imagined the invisible forces that connected them, the unseen threads that linked all living things and all time into one flowing current of existence. When he ascended the throne, Ezana's visions were no longer the secret dreams of a boy. They became the framework for a kingdom, the unseen architecture behind every wall built, every market opened, every path laid through the hills. The obelisks of Axum rose not merely as monuments to power, but as beacons aligned with the sun and stars, each carving and engraving chosen to reflect the movement of light and shadow over the year. A map of celestial order mirrored in stone. Coins minted in his reign carried messages, subtle yet profound, symbols of continuity and faith, blending old gods and new, showing travelers and traders alike that Axum was a kingdom aware of both past and present, of spirit and earth, of human hands and divine intention. His conversion to Christianity was not a decision of impulse, but a culmination of visions and reflection. In quiet chambers of his palace, he dreamed of a light that did not fade, of a presence that spoke without words, of rivers flowing not in one direction, but looping into themselves like endless cycles of understanding. Priests and sages arrived bearing scrolls and sacred texts, yet the visions he had long carried shaped how he interpreted them. Christianity, to Ezana, was not merely doctrine, but a lens through which the entire kingdom could be harmonized. A way to guide the people to live in alignment with forces seen and unseen, to transform cities and lives into reflections of the divine order he had glimpsed in dreams. Under his guidance, churches rose across Axum, built on high ground where wind and light could touch every carved stone. Inside, mosaics shimmered softly in the golden glow of candlelight, depicting visions of saints, angels, and celestial movements, each designed to draw the observer into contemplation, into a subtle awareness of something beyond the everyday. In the marketplaces, traders and travelers noticed patterns, the alignment of booths, the way paths guided movement, the way the flow of commerce mirrored the harmony Azana had envisioned, ensuring not chaos but rhythm, not mere survival but balance. Yet for all his attention to physical and spiritual structures, Azana also tended to the inner life of his kingdom. He walked among his people, speaking quietly to elders and children, observing, listening, and reflecting. He understood that a kingdom was more than walls, coins, and worship. It was the living pulse of those who inhabited it. He walked at dawn when the first light painted the hills gold, watching the shadows stretch across the valleys, and he felt the kingdom breathe as one organism, each heart and mind a thread in the greater weave. Nights were a time of vision. When the moon rose high over Axum, Azana would stand upon terraces of his palace, feeling the cool stone beneath his feet and the night wind across his face. He would close his eyes and imagine distant lands, see rivers that shimmered like liquid silver, and trace in thought the paths of stars across the heavens. Dreams came unbidden, and in them he walked alongside his ancestors, conversed with spirits of animals long extinct, and traversed landscapes that bent time and memory together. These nocturnal journeys guided decisions he would make in the waking world. Military campaigns were chosen not only for strategy but for harmony. Alliances were formed with the flow of cosmic and earthly rhythm in mind. And yet, despite this grandeur, Azana remained approachable. He laughed quietly with servants, shared bread with travelers, and in small acts of care, he connected the infinite patterns he envisioned with the ordinary lives of his people. The obelisks, many of them he commissioned, were more than monuments. They were beacons of memory and alignment, each stone carved and placed to catch light at precise moments, creating forms that reflected the sky, the sun, the moon, and the stars. Visitors often felt an inexplicable calm when standing in their shadows, as if the stones themselves exhaled centuries of knowledge and quiet power. Axum under Azana was a kingdom alive in multiple dimensions. The cities, markets, and temples were only one layer. Beneath and around them was a network of intention, dreams, and observation. A subtle architecture of consciousness that shaped experience. Those who spent nights near the palaces or on the outskirts of the city reported dreams filled with intricate patterns of life, visions of people and places they had never seen, and a sense of connection to something both immense and intimate. Traders carried the coins, the symbols, and stories far beyond the kingdom, leaving echoes of Axum in distant lands. And yet, for all this, Azana's greatest achievement was not visible in stone or currency. It was the weaving together of human, earth, and divine perception. The subtle harmonization of a kingdom so that it became more than the sum of its parts. Scholars, travelers, and dreamers who later visited Axum would speak of a quiet majesty that could not be captured in words, a sense that they had entered a space where human endeavor touched the eternal. Even centuries later, the ruins, the obelisks, the coins, and the faint whispers of history carry the trace of a king who painted heaven on earth, a ruler whose vision extended beyond his lifetime, shaping the minds and dreams of those who come after. Azana's story reminds us that leadership is not merely about power or conquest. It is about awareness, reflection, and the ability to perceive patterns that others cannot. It is about creating spaces, both physical and mental, where life, thought, and spirit converge. His kingdom, his obelisks, his coins, and his churches remain enduring symbols of that philosophy. A testament to a ruler who understood that to touch eternity, one must weave the ordinary into the extraordinary, the seen into the unseen, and the fleeting into the timeless. The jar that never broke. The jar that never broke rested in the quiet hills of ancient Israel, its surface worn by time, yet unyielding to the centuries that passed over it. It sat in a simple storage chamber of a Bronze Age settlement, surrounded by clay, stone, and the scattered remnants of daily life, fragments of tools, remnants of grain, and traces of fires that had long since cooled. Yet this jar, simple in shape and unadorned in decoration, carried with it a presence, a quiet sense of endurance that seemed almost alive. Travelers and archaeologists who encountered it centuries later often described a strange sensation, as if the jar observed them, or perhaps held in its walls the memory of every hand that had touched it, every grain it had stored, every season it had endured. It was made from clay, harvested from the riverbanks, molded with care, fired with skill, and placed in the cool shadows of the storage rooms, its hollow body waiting silently for the purposes it would serve. Within its walls, the jar seemed to hold the essence of preservation, of patience, and of quiet resilience. Those who studied it noted its unusual sturdiness. Countless similar jars from the period had cracked, shattered, or eroded over time. yet this one remained intact, as if some unseen force had protected it. Or perhaps it had been imbued with the attention and intent of its makers in such a way that it became more than mere clay. Life around it was ordinary, yet filled with quiet rhythms. Farmers would carry grain from fields along dusty paths, measuring carefully, pouring into storage, and closing the jars with lids carved from the same clay, sometimes sealed with wax or resin. The air smelled faintly of earth and harvest. Children played nearby, their laughter echoing across the hills, and the wind whispered through olive groves, bending the branches in soft arcs. But the jar, despite its simplicity, seemed to hold the weight of centuries, the patience of countless hands, and a subtle awareness that stretched beyond the ordinary. At night, when the household slept, it was said that the jar would sometimes be noticed in dreams, not by the living, but by those who had long since passed. Dreamers recounted visions of grain flowing like rivers, of fires burning without consuming, of shadows moving across stone floors in patterns that seemed deliberate, meaningful, and yet impossible to interpret fully. The jar itself was unchanging, yet through it passed the currents of life, work, celebration, and ritual. Its resilience became a symbol, not only to those who used it, but to future generations who discovered it among the ruins of Bronze Age homes. Archaeologists found that its walls contained traces of the grain it once held, the chemical memory of barley and wheat preserved in ways that mirrored the jar's unbroken form. Even without decoration or inscription, the jar communicated a story of survival, of endurance, and of the quiet constancy of human effort over time. Scholars speculated that its strength might have been a product of careful selection of clay, firing temperature, or construction technique. But some felt there was more, a subtle magic, a resonance in the shape, weight, and presence of the jar, something intangible yet undeniably there, the way a particular note lingers in the air long after a bell has stopped ringing. The community that used the jar was attuned to cycles of planting and harvest, fields of wheat and barley swayed under the sun, and families labored together to gather, thresh, and store grain. The jar was central to these rhythms, a silent participant in the processes of growth, sustenance, and continuity. In its hollow body, it held not just grain, but the care, hope, and intention of those who depended upon it. Visitors centuries later often remark that when they stand near it, there is a stillness, a subtle hum of life passing through, as though time itself has folded around the jar, leaving an impression of endurance, patience, and quiet wisdom. Every mark, every imperfection, every smooth curve of its clay tells a story of hands shaping it, of seasons flowing past, and of the persistent pulse of human life. Even the placement of the jar within the storage room seemed deliberate. It was never at the edges, where it might be knocked over, nor in the center, where it would draw attention. It rested slightly aside, close to the shadows, where the coolness of the floor protected it, yet where it remained accessible. This careful positioning reflects an understanding of balance, foresight, and respect for the object, qualities that imbued the jar with subtle power. Dreams associated with the jar are often described by modern researchers as a form of temporal echo. Those who sleep near replicas or even images of the jar recount visions of Bronze Age life. Fires burning with an unnatural steadiness, shadows moving in patterns that convey messages, and grains flowing like liquid gold through hands that feel both familiar and distant. It is as though the jar carries a memory, not just of objects or material, but of experience itself, preserving in its silence the rhythms of life that passed through the people who made, used, and revered it. Over centuries, the jar has remained a quiet witness to history. Settlements rose and fell around it, families came and went, and civilizations shifted like sands, yet the jar endured. Its resilience became almost mythic, a symbol that continuity and care can persist against time itself. Even in decay, even when surroundings crumble, the jar's presence conveys a subtle lesson that attention, care, and intention leave a mark beyond the immediate, a trace that survives when all else fades. Archaeological studies reveal that similar jars were often destroyed, broken, or lost, yet this one survived, untouched by the accidents and disasters that claimed so many of its companions. Perhaps it was the skill of its maker, the quality of its clay, or the deliberate rituals surrounding its use. Perhaps it was something beyond ordinary understanding, a quiet magic embedded in its form, a resonance that protected it, or perhaps a simple echo of human mindfulness preserved perfectly in material form. Those who encounter it feel this resonance, a gentle pull on consciousness, a subtle suggestion that objects, like people, hold more than their apparent surface. There is depth, memory, and quiet purpose, an enduring connection between maker, object, and observer that transcends ordinary experience. Even now, centuries later, standing before the jar is like standing in the quiet eye of history. One can sense the cycles of planting, harvest, and storage, the steady rhythm of domestic life, the care poured into each action. The jar seems almost to breathe with the echoes of those who lived beside it, holding within its walls the accumulated patience of countless hands and minds. Its unbroken form, simple and unadorned, conveys a sense of calm, continuity, and the subtle magic of human diligence that reaches across the ages. The throne that remembered kings. The throne that remembered kings stood in the heart of ancient Israel, a seat carved not only of wood and stone but of memory itself. It rested in the Palace of Solomon, a structure of grandeur and quiet majesty, built of cedars from Lebanon and adorned with gold and intricate carvings that traced the stories of kingdoms, prophets, and the divine presence itself. The throne was said to have been crafted with intention beyond mere craftsmanship. Every curve, every inlay, every subtle contour was designed to reflect the balance of power, wisdom, and justice. It was a place where mortal ambition met the whisper of eternity, a seat that bore witness to the weight of decisions, the measure of leadership, and the subtle pulse of a kingdom striving to align with the divine order. Those who approached it felt a reverence that transcended understanding. The air in the hall seemed to still, and even the faintest sounds, the shuffle of sandals, the whisper of a robe resonated with the echo of centuries. Courtiers, scribes, and priests often remarked that to sit upon the throne was to feel the presence of those who had ruled before, to sense the rhythm of the kingdom, the flow of judgment, and the quiet burden of responsibility passed from king to king. Solomon, the wisest of kings, understood that the throne was more than a seat. It was a vessel of continuity, a silent witness to decisions that shaped history, a repository for the intentions, mistakes, and triumphs of rulers who came before and those who would follow. Its carvings depicted not only scenes of conquest and worship, but subtle narratives of life itself: the sowing of grain, the rising of the sun, the movement of animals across hills and valleys, the passing of time measured in shadows and light. To sit upon the throne was to feel the kingdom itself as a living entity, the pulse of people, the whisper of wind across deserts, the distant murmur of rivers, all converging into the quiet resonance of presence that only the throne could hold. In the court, visitors often described visions that accompanied their time near the throne. Shadows shifted in patterns that seemed meaningful, light fell in ways that suggested unseen geometry, and the hum of voices carried through the hall as if layered with echoes of discussions from centuries past. Solomon would meditate upon the throne at dawn, when first light touched the palace, letting his gaze trace the delicate carvings while the air filled with the scent of cedar, incense, and the distant river. He envisioned the city below, Jerusalem alive with traders, farmers, and artisans, each movement reflecting a harmony that extended beyond the city's walls into the unseen order of the world. Decisions made from the throne were informed by visions as much as by counsel. Solomon's judgments balanced justice and mercy, strategy and foresight, guided by dreams that came to him as he rested his hands upon the throne's armrests. These dreams carried images of distant lands, of people in need, of paths not yet taken, of futures both prosperous and perilous. The throne seemed to absorb the wisdom of these visions, its surface warmed by the hands of kings and rulers who had come before, its carvings etched with the subtle memory of countless moments of thought, contemplation, and governance. Visitors centuries later, when the throne had become legend and the palace had long since been abandoned or transformed, still spoke of its quiet majesty. Some claimed to feel the weight of decisions that had shaped nations, the gentle hum of ideas, and the echo of moral deliberation. Others reported dreams that mirrored Solomon's own visions, of cities rising and falling, of rivers flowing through valleys that seemed both known and strange, of people walking paths that stretched beyond ordinary time. The throne's memory extended not only to kings but to those who served the kingdom. Courtiers, scribes, and soldiers left traces upon it, in ways subtle yet lasting, the imprint of intention, the echo of thought, the lingering pulse of responsibility. To touch the wood was to touch history itself, to feel the quiet accumulation of centuries where human and divine purpose intersected. Its resilience, both physical and symbolic, became a measure of the kingdom's continuity. Though dynasties changed, borders shifted, and empires rose and fell, the throne remained, silently observing, absorbing, remembering. In Solomon's own time, the throne was central not only to governance but to ritual, to the enactment of laws and the observation of sacred ceremonies. Priests carried incense and recited prayers, the air vibrating with a resonance that seemed to align with the throne's own memory. The king's decrees were issued from this seat, and in doing so, he felt the weight of responsibility not as a burden, but as an opportunity to harmonize the kingdom with a greater order, the rhythm of the world itself. The carvings on the throne told stories in ways that were subtle yet profound. They depicted animals, not as trophies of hunt or conquest, but as living participants in the kingdom's ecosystem. Trees, not merely as decoration, but as markers of time and growth. Rivers, not only as watercourses, but as conveyors of life and connection. To sit and observe the throne was to witness a silent symphony of life, encoded in wood, gold, and memory. Over centuries, the throne's legend grew. Even when physical access was denied, stories of its presence circulated. influencing rulers, dreamers, and seekers of wisdom. The throne became a symbol of continuity and insight, a reminder that leadership is not solely an exercise of power, but a weaving together of perception, moral clarity, and connection with forces beyond immediate understanding. Those who approached it, whether in person or in imagination, felt a quiet reverence that softened thought, slowed time, and allowed reflection upon the flow of existence itself. Dreams associated with the throne often carried visions of cities and landscapes as yet unseen, of decisions unfolding across generations, of people whose lives were touched by choices made on that single seat of wisdom. The throne that remembered kings endured beyond the life of any ruler. It held within its structure the accumulated memory of governance, contemplation, and vision. It carried forward the essence of a kingdom, its people, its laws, and its harmony with both earth and divine presence. Even in silence, it spoke. Even when abandoned, it resonated. It remained a place where past and future converged, where mortal ambition met eternal insight, and where human consciousness could touch something greater, a bridge between the tangible world and the subtle currents that shape life, legacy, and time itself. The coin that defied empires. The coin rested in the palm of a traveler long ago, its surface worn smooth by the countless hands that had carried it across lands, seas, and generations. It was small and unassuming at first glance, a simple disk of silver, yet it carried the weight of cities, empires, and the ambitions of men and women whose lives had intertwined with its passage. Athens had minted it during the height of its influence, when marble temples gleamed in the sun, the Parthenon standing like a beacon over the Acropolis, and the streets below hummed with merchants, philosophers, soldiers, and artisans. Its obverse bore the face of Athena, serene yet commanding, the goddess of wisdom and warfare, watching over the city with an expression that seemed to see beyond time itself. Her gaze, engraved in silver, carried the subtle authority of protection and guidance, as though she could perceive not only the hands that held the coin, but the intentions that moved behind each transaction, each trade, each choice. On the reverse was the image of an owl, its wide eyes engraved in sharp detail, perched upon a branch. The owl, emblematic of knowledge and vigilance, was a silent witness to the countless exchanges, the accumulation of wealth, and the passage of ideas that followed wherever the coin traveled. Unlike other coins that would fade into obscurity, be lost, melted, or broken, this one seemed to persist, moving with purpose, slipping into pockets of traders, tucked under robes of envoys, carried across seas to foreign ports. Every journey added a subtle layer to its memory, a quiet accumulation of human activity, intent, and observation. The coin witnessed markets in Athens, where merchants weighed grain and olive oil, where copper and silver exchanged hands, and where the rhythm of daily life created a pattern as steady and precise as the beating of a drum. It passed through the hands of philosophers discussing virtue, strategy, and the nature of the cosmos, and through soldiers preparing for campaigns that would decide the fate of distant lands. In its travels, it became part of countless stories, a father giving it to a son to secure his first meal, a merchant offering it to an artisan for finely crafted pottery, an ambassador exchanging it to secure passage through the city gates of a distant kingdom. Each transaction, each touch, left an imperceptible trace on the coin, a subtle impression of human thought and intention, like ripples across a still pond. Its endurance was remarkable. Wars raged across the Mediterranean, empires rose and fell, and yet the coin continued its journey, carried in pockets, purses, and satchels, through deserts, forests, and ports, often slipping unnoticed into the hands of the next traveler, and yet always present, always moving. Scholars centuries later, studying coins recovered from shipwrecks and ruins, marveled at its survival. The silver retained its sheen, the images of Athena and the owl clear, as though the coin had absorbed the care and attention of countless individuals, and in doing so, gained a kind of resilience beyond ordinary understanding. It was said that those who held the coin for even a moment could feel a strange connection to distant times, an echo of the markets and streets of Athens, of the scent of sea salt and dust, of voices calling out in trade and conversation. In dreams, the coin appeared as a guide, moving through landscapes of marble, olive groves, and distant harbors, showing the dreamer not just commerce but connection, the flow of human ambition and cooperation across time. Travelers in the ancient world often remarked that coins carried more than monetary value. They carried trust, authority, and the subtle language of culture. The Athenian coin, in particular, was more than a medium of exchange. It was a symbol of civic pride, a mark of Athenian influence, and a carrier of the ideas and identity of a city-state that had shaped philosophy, art, and governance in ways that reverberated for centuries. It was passed from hand to hand with care, often tucked into robes or boxes, exchanged with slight bows or whispered thanks, the smallest gestures of respect acknowledging the coin's significance beyond mere metal. Its travels are whispered through history, across the Aegean Sea to islands where olive trees swayed under the sun, into marketplaces in Asia Minor bustling with traders, through ports along the coast of Italy where merchants marveled at the precision of Greek minting, and further still, carried by caravans across deserts to lands where the faces of those who struck it were unknown. Yet the coin continued to bridge distances, linking economies, ideas, and people. The owl upon its reverse seemed almost to watch the passage of time itself, vigilant and patient, unblinking as centuries folded over it. Its eyes, though engraved in silver, seemed to hold the memory of every trade, every journey, every hand that had carried it, every decision that had been made in its presence. Those who studied it long after Athens' dominance faded often spoke of a peculiar resonance, an awareness that the coin was not merely an object but a witness, a repository of human experience, silently recording the movements of empires, the rise and fall of kings, the quiet perseverance of ordinary lives. In the quiet of a scholar's study, the coin seemed to hum with subtle energy, the soft glint of silver catching the light like a distant sun. Thoughts of markets, harbors, olive groves, and temples arose in the mind, and it felt as though the coin carried not only metal but memory, a connection to the ebb and flow of human history that stretched far beyond its physical presence. It had survived shipwrecks, invasions, economic shifts, and centuries of decay, yet remained, resilient, enduring, a silent observer of time's relentless passage. Even those who had never seen Athens could feel its aura through the coin. They imagined marble steps worn by sandals, streets crowded with citizens debating philosophy, and the clink of coins exchanging hands, each transaction reinforcing the coin's role as both object and observer, as a connector of people, places, and eras. And so it traveled, across mountains, rivers, and seas, into pockets of travelers, through the hands of merchants and kings, scholars and sailors. Its journey was a map of human ambition, curiosity, and continuity. Each step, each exchange, each touch added layers to its silent story, accumulating centuries of experience into a single, enduring presence. The coin did not simply exist, it remembered, held, and reflected the imperceptible currents of civilization, the flow of trade and thought, and the quiet resilience of human intent. The axe that shaped continents. The axe rested in the soft earth of Neolithic Ireland, its polished stone glinting faintly in the dim light of early morning as the sun began to rise over rolling hills and mist-laden valleys. It was heavy in the hands of those who carried it, yet balanced, shaped with care and intention by hands skilled in the subtle art of crafting tools that could endure the centuries. Its surface was smooth, the edges sharp yet refined, the contours carved to fit the human hand as if it were an extension of the body itself. This axe was more than a tool, it was a bridge between humanity and the land, a device through which people shaped forests, cleared fields, and carved the foundations of settlements that would endure for generations. In the quiet of the village, the first stirrings of dawn brought smoke from hearths, the scent of damp earth, and the soft murmur of families preparing for the day. The axe lay carefully beside a workbench, its blade reflecting the rising light, and already, its presence seemed to influence the rhythm of life. Farmers approached it with reverence, recognizing not only its utility, but the weight of history it carried. For each swing of the axe would cut into the earth, transforming wilderness into cultivated land, shaping the forests into pathways, dwellings, and boundaries. It bore witness to the birth of human civilization in its earliest and most delicate form. The first strikes of the axe against timber were precise and deliberate. The sound echoed across hills and valleys, a rhythm that seemed to blend with the song of birds, the whisper of wind through grass, and the distant call of rivers. Each cut was a dialogue between human intent and the resilience of nature, a conversation written in the fall of wood, the split of bark, and the steady accumulation of cleared space that would become shelter, tools, and future villages. Those who wielded the axe understood its power. It was not merely a stone, not merely a tool, it was an agent of transformation, a companion in the shaping of the world. Its presence required mindfulness, respect, and patience. Even a single misjudged strike could waste effort, harm the land unnecessarily, or damage the axe itself. And yet, in its careful use, it offered reward, the creation of structures that would endure, the ability to harvest and store food, and the subtle satisfaction of aligning human effort with natural rhythm. As the seasons passed, the axe became part of daily life, moving from hands to hands, accompanying journeys, shaping not only land but the stories of those who carried it. Children watched as elders demonstrated its use, learning the quiet discipline, the respect for the earth, and the deep understanding of cause and effect that came from working closely with such a simple yet profoundly influential object. Even in leisure, the axe held presence. It rested in shadowed corners, catching light that filtered through thatched roofs, reminding all who saw it of the enduring bond between people and the environment, between intention and result. Beyond practical use, the axe carried symbolic meaning. It was part of rituals and ceremonies that acknowledged the land, seasons, and the unseen forces that guided life. Offerings were made beside it, and its placement within sacred spaces reflected an understanding that tools, like humans, are connected to the cycles of growth, decay, and renewal. In dreams, the axe often appeared to those who respected it. People reported visions of forests expanding and contracting, of rivers bending to carve fertile valleys, of stone and timber rising in patterns that seemed deliberate, purposeful, and yet beyond ordinary understanding. In these dreams, the axe was alive, a silent guide through the unfolding story of human ingenuity and connection to the land. Its movements mirrored the flow of water, the growth of trees, and the migration of animals, creating a harmony between human activity and the natural world. Travelers and traders who visited the settlement noted the presence of the axe. Even from a distance, it seemed to radiate quiet authority, a subtle command to respect the land, the people, and the work being done. Stories of its origins spread across hills and rivers, tales of a master craftsman who had selected stone from a distant quarry, polished and shaped it with care, and imbued it with purpose so that it would endure generations. Archaeologists centuries later would marvel at the precision and balance of the axe, noting that it was crafted from a single piece of stone, carefully polished, and perfectly weighted to fit human hands. They would reconstruct the life of the people who used it, imagining the forests, the rivers, the homes, and the small communities that grew around such tools. The axe's endurance was remarkable. Many similar tools had fractured, worn away, or been lost to the shifting tides of time, yet this one survived, preserved in peat bogs, soil, and memory. Its continued existence created a bridge across millennia, allowing modern observers to feel the pulse of Neolithic life, the rhythms of daily labor, and the intimate connection between human intent and environmental transformation. Even when removed from its original context, the axe carried an aura, a sense of presence that seemed to hold both the past and the potential of what could be shaped. To hold it was to connect with the hands of ancestors, to feel the continuity of effort, care, and creativity that stretches across generations. The axe shaped more than wood. It shaped the perception of the world. It was an instrument through which humans learned to measure strength, precision, patience, and foresight. Its repeated use taught lessons that extended beyond immediate survival, the value of observation, the harmony of force and restraint, and the subtle interdependence between action and consequence. As centuries passed, the axe moved beyond the village into legends. It became not just a tool but a symbol of endurance, of human resilience, and of the profound impact that even a single object can have when wielded with respect, skill, and awareness. Its story continued in dreams, in stories whispered across generations, and in the careful reconstruction of archaeological memory, where each mark, polish, and indentation carried echoes of lives long past. Even today, when one holds a replica or observes the preserved artifact, there is a sensation that it is more than stone. It is memory, intention, and history distilled into a single enduring form. Its weight is felt not only physically but emotionally, connecting the observer to the vast network of human effort, imagination, and survival that it represents. And as the mind dwells upon it, imagining the forests cleared, the settlements built, and the generations who touched it, there is a subtle recognition of continuity, a sense that human endeavor leaves impressions far beyond what is visible, that even the simplest object can carry profound meaning across time and space. The axe is not only a testament to ingenuity, but to patience, foresight, and connection. The quiet, enduring link between humans and the land, between present and future, between thought, action, and consequence. The ring that measured the sky. The sphere rested quietly on the wooden table of Archimedes' workshop in ancient Syracuse, a city humming with the rhythm of the Mediterranean, its harbor alive with the calls of sailors, the creak of ships, and the faint scent of salt mingled with fresh fish from the morning markets. But in that quiet corner, amid scattered scrolls, ink-stained papyrus, and measuring instruments of bronze and wood, the sphere itself held a calm of another kind. It was small, delicate in appearance, yet monumental in purpose. This was not merely a mathematical instrument, nor merely a tool for observation. It was a vessel of understanding, a ring of possibility, a sphere that measured the heavens, capturing the invisible patterns of the sky, and transforming them into shapes, rotations, and distances that could be grasped by human intellect. Archimedes, with the soft light of dawn filtering through his window, traced his fingers along its smooth bronze surface. His eyes followed the delicate curves and interlocking rings, each one engraved with notations, divisions, and subtle calibrations. To him it was more than an object, it was a language, a bridge between the earthly and the celestial, a key to understanding the cosmos and the hidden order of the universe. The sphere had been designed to align with the movements of the stars, the sun, and the moon, each rotation revealing angles, distances, and cycles that most people could only perceive as mystery or fate. It could model eclipses, predict solstices, and track the movements of planets with astonishing precision. But beyond its technical brilliance, the sphere held something more subtle, a sense of wonder, a connection to the infinite, and the quiet hum of thought extended into the fabric of the cosmos. As Archimedes worked, he imagined the sphere in motion, suspended among the stars, each ring turning with a perfect cadence, the planets moving through their orbits as if guided by invisible hands. He marveled at the harmony of it, the precision, the balance, the reflection of divine order in mathematics. To hold the sphere in his hands was to touch the heavens, to feel the pull of gravity and the rhythm of celestial dance, and to understand, at least partially, the mind of the universe. Students and apprentices often gathered around him, their eyes wide with curiosity, as he demonstrated the sphere's subtle mechanics. They watched as the inner rings rotated smoothly within the outer frame, aligning with specific stars, showing paths across the night sky, and illustrating principles of geometry that would otherwise remain abstract. The room filled with soft whispers of amazement, the scratch of styluses on papyrus, and the quiet rhythm of observation, each participant feeling the weight of knowledge being passed through tactile experience, visual understanding, and contemplative attention. Beyond the workshop, the city of Syracuse carried on its daily life, unaware of the extraordinary object quietly modeling the heavens within the walls of one scholar's home. The markets bustled with merchants trading grain, olives, and wine. Children ran through narrow streets, laughter bouncing off stone walls, while craftsmen pounded and carved, shaping tools, furniture, and jewelry. Soldiers marched along the city gates, their armor clinking in cadence, and the sea lapped gently against the quays, carrying the scent of adventure and distant lands. And yet, within this ordinary rhythm of life, the sphere remained a silent witness, capturing, in its rotations and engravings, the essence of a cosmos both vast and intimate. Archimedes often observed it at night, the workshop illuminated by the soft flicker of oil lamps as he contemplated the motions of the stars and the hidden mechanics of planets invisible to the naked eye. He imagined the distant movements of Jupiter and Saturn, the subtle tilt of the Earth, the phases of the moon mirrored in delicate rotations. With each adjustment, he felt as if he were conversing with the universe itself, translating celestial patterns into human comprehension, bridging the infinite and the finite through thought, observation, and craftsmanship. Apprentices, inspired by the sphere, began to dream themselves. They imagined standing upon the celestial rings, floating among the stars, tracing the paths of planets, and feeling the gentle pull of forces that governed both the heavens and the tides. The sphere, in their dreams, became a portal, a guide, a storyteller of time and motion. Its rings were rivers of light, flowing through the dark fabric of space, carrying the whispers of distant worlds, the rhythm of orbits, and the subtle music of spheres. As the seasons turned, the sphere remained, its mechanics precise, its presence quietly resonant. Archimedes' notes documented calculations, predictions, and observations, each one layering meaning and intention into the bronze. Every rotation captured not only the position of celestial bodies, but the dedication, curiosity, and awe of those who engaged with it. Even the slightest motion of a ring echoed human understanding, the bridging of perception with reality, imagination with observation, and insight with wonder. Centuries later, the sphere, or replicas inspired by it, would be rediscovered, marveled at for both its craftsmanship and its profound ability to convey knowledge. Scholars held it, tracing the rings, imagining the motions of the heavens it had been designed to represent, and sensing a subtle resonance of thought reaching across millennia. It became a symbol not only of scientific achievement but of human aspiration, the desire to understand, to model, and to connect with the infinite, even while standing firmly on the earth. Dreams continued to surround it. Those who studied, or even glimpsed images of the sphere, reported visions of cosmic choreography, stars moving with gentle precision, planets orbiting in elegant arcs, and light bending through invisible pathways. They felt the pull of gravity, the quiet heartbeat of the universe, and the hum of intelligence embedded in celestial order. The sphere's presence seemed to extend beyond time, connecting ancient scholars with modern observers, teaching lessons in patience, observation, and reverence. Its legacy was not only in measurements and calculations, but in the cultivation of curiosity, wonder, and humility before the vastness of existence. To hold it in mind, to follow its rings with imagination, was to participate in a quiet dialogue between human thought and cosmic order. Even without physical interaction, the sphere conveyed a sense of continuity, a recognition that the pursuit of understanding is itself a journey that transcends generations. Its intricate design, the precise interlocking of rings, the subtle engravings, all spoke to a meticulous mind seeking order within complexity, clarity within the unknown. As centuries passed, the sphere traveled in thought and imagination. Reproductions appeared in academies, illustrations in manuscripts, and descriptions in texts across Europe. Philosophers and scientists studied it, learned from it, and dreamed of the cosmos through its framework. It became both a practical instrument and a symbol of human endeavor, linking the tangible world of observation with the intangible world of ideas, dreams, and possibility. In quiet moments, when scholars or dreamers traced its rings, they could feel the echo of Archimedes' own mind, his reverence for observation, his patience, and his subtle sense of wonder. The sphere had become a repository of human aspiration, a vessel not only of mathematics, but of curiosity, imagination, and the eternal desire to understand the heavens. It measured more than the sky. It measured ambition, patience, observation, and the delicate connection between human life and the infinite beyond. The stone that danced in shadows. The stone lay quietly beneath the rising sun, cool and ancient, its surface etched with scenes that had endured centuries of rain, wind, and shadow. At Angkor Wat, the temple complex stretched across the Cambodian horizon, its towers piercing the sky like silent sentinels, its walls a testament to devotion, power, and human artistry. The reliefs on those walls were not mere decoration, they were living stories, frozen in stone, capturing the rhythm of life, myth, and the divine. And within those carvings, some claimed, the stone itself seemed to move, to shift subtly as the light changed, as if the shadows that crossed its surface were dancing to an invisible melody. In the early morning, when the temple lay in stillness, the air filled with the soft calls of birds, the rustle of leaves in the surrounding forest, and the distant murmur of the river, the reliefs came alive. Figures carved in deep bas relief cast long, delicate shadows that crept across the walls, transforming static images into dynamic, fleeting performances. Warriors, dancers, and deities appeared to step forward, to bow, to gesture with a life of their own. Pilgrims arriving at the temple would pause, sensing something subtle yet profound, a quiet vitality lingering in the stone, a sense that history itself was breathing, stretching, and moving in ways that ordinary eyes could barely perceive. Among the carvings, the apsaras, the celestial dancers, were the most captivating. Their forms, so carefully rendered, seemed to sway with invisible music, their hands frozen mid-gesture but whispering the motion of song and movement that had long since ceased. As the sun climbed, light shifted across the walls, and the stone appeared to dance. Each change in illumination brought new angles, new rhythms, a gentle interplay of shadow and form that suggested a hidden energy, a pulse running through the centuries, as if the artists had imbued their work not only with beauty, but with life. Archaeologists and historians would later study these reliefs, marveling at the skill, precision, and vision required to carve them. They traced the folds of garments, the subtle expressions on faces, the delicate balance of posture, and the flowing movement captured in rigid stone. Yet even their detailed analysis could not fully explain the sensation that those who stood in quiet contemplation felt, a faint vibration almost imperceptible that suggested the stone itself remembered the dances, the rituals, the prayers, and the lives that had shaped it. The temple itself had been built over decades, a labor of devotion and power, an expression of both spiritual and earthly ambition. Every block of sandstone, every tower, every corridor was carefully designed to align with cosmic principles, reflecting the harmony of the universe, the order of life, and the rhythm of human and divine interaction. And within this monumental structure, the reliefs were not static, they were active participants in the life of the temple. In the evenings, as shadows lengthened, the stones seemed to tell new stories. Figures that had appeared solemn and rigid during the day now seemed to lean toward one another, gestures extended, eyes meeting in silent communication. The flicker of torchlight in the corridors made the carvings shimmer, the reliefs appearing to breathe, to move subtly, as if the dancers were responding to unseen music, as if the stone itself retained memory, movement, and intention. Local storytellers passed down tales of the temple, speaking of spirits lingering within the carvings, of protective energies woven into the stone, and of moments when visitors felt drawn into the reliefs, as though the boundary between observer and art dissolved. Children listened wide-eyed, imagining the apsaras stepping down from the walls at night, the warriors marching silently across the corridors, and the animals, lions, elephants, serpents, animated in quiet procession, shadow and stone entwined. Beyond myth, the stone recorded history in its own way. It captured battles and victories, rituals of kings and priests, offerings and celebrations. It documented the lives of ordinary people as well, their work, their worship, their presence etched in subtle gestures, carvings that revealed the texture of daily life in the Angkorian Empire. And yet, within these records, there was something more. A pulse, a rhythm, a sense that time itself was layered within the stone, that each carving carried the echo of the artist's hand, the viewer's gaze, and the countless generations who had passed beneath the temple's towers. Travelers coming from distant lands, passing through the jungle, often described sensations that could not easily be explained. They spoke of feeling drawn toward particular reliefs, of shadows flickering in ways that seemed conscious, of a subtle movement when they turned their heads, as if the figures themselves were aware, responding to attention, memory, or devotion. In their dreams, some reported dancing with the apsaras, walking among warriors, or following animals carved in stone as they moved in silent, precise steps through corridors of memory and imagination. These experiences, though personal and ephemeral, were echoed across centuries, suggesting that the stone held not only history, but a resonance, a quiet vitality that extended beyond the material, into the realm of perception, imagination, and spiritual awareness. At dawn, when mist rose from the jungle floor and sunlight pierced the canopy, the reliefs transformed once again. The apsara's hands caught the light, producing a cascade of shadows across the wall. Serpents and lions appeared to slither and stride, and the scenes of courtly life and divine assembly shimmered with the possibility of motion, as if the ancient stone had absorbed life itself and was merely revealing it under the correct alignment of light and perspective. The artisans who created these reliefs had worked with a deep understanding of their medium. They knew that the interplay of light and shadow, the depth of carving, the proportions of figures, all could create the illusion of movement. But more than that, they seemed to have embedded an awareness, a pulse, that centuries later would still resonate in the perception of those who looked, lingered, and watched. Every mark in the stone, every curve, every angle contributed to the effect. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at times, but undeniable in the quiet of contemplation. The jungle surrounding the temple added its own chorus to the experience. Birds' calls echoed between towers, leaves rustled in a rhythm that mirrored the motion in the carvings, and the river nearby whispered along stones that had been shaped by time and water. This living soundscape blended seamlessly with the silent choreography of the reliefs, creating a multi-dimensional performance of shadow, light, sound, and imagination. Scholars studying Angkor Wat would later analyze the iconography, noting the precision, symbolism, and narrative content. But even the most detailed analysis could not account for the perception of movement, the sense of vitality, the quiet hum of life that seemed embedded in the stone. Observers often reported a feeling of presence, as though the stone remembered the hands that shaped it, the voices that chanted beside it, the feet that had danced on the floors of the temple, and the countless eyes that had traced its forms across generations. At night, when the temple was empty and the moon rose high over towers, the shadows deepened and shifted. Figures seemed to lean forward, gestures extended, and the dance of stone and darkness continued, subtle and continuous, creating a quiet spectacle for those attuned to perception, rhythm, and the slow unfolding of history. The stone, through its carvings, had absorbed more than skill. It had absorbed time, attention, devotion, and imagination. It was a recorder, a performer, a keeper of memory, and a guide into realms where human creativity met the eternal rhythms of light, shadow, and form. Over centuries, the temple weathered storms, the jungle encroached, kings and civilizations rose and fell, yet the stone remained, quiet and patient. Visitors in modern times would feel the echoes of past devotion, the subtle movement in shadows, the pulse of artistry that transcended language, culture, and era. The carvings continued to speak, not in words but in rhythm, motion, and perception. They whispered of devotion, of skill, of the passage of time, and of the delicate interplay between human intention and the subtle forces of light and shadow that animate perception. To walk through the corridors of Angkor Wat is to enter a world where stone remembers, where shadows dance, and where the boundary between material and immaterial, between past and present, dissolves in quiet understanding. Observers often felt transported, as if stepping not only through space but through time, feeling the pulse of countless hands, eyes, and imaginations converging in the silent choreography of reliefs, light, and shadow. The stone continues to inspire awe, reflection, and a deep sense of connection, its silent dance an eternal witness to human creativity, devotion, and the delicate, enduring rhythm of life and memory that flows through the ages. The vessel that held dreams. The vessel lay on the earthen floor of a quiet workshop in ancient Peru, a creation of Moksha hands long ago, shaped with care from the rich red clay of the northern valleys. It was small yet profound, its surface adorned with delicate figures, animals, faces, and gestures, capturing scenes of ritual, life, and imagination. Though fragile to the touch, it carried a strength beyond its material, an endurance of meaning, memory, and intention that would stretch across centuries. The Moksha people believed that objects could hold not only utility, but spirit, and this vessel was a repository of dreams, desires, and the quiet currents of life that flowed through their communities. Early morning light filtered through woven reed walls, falling across the vessel's surface and illuminating every carved detail. Faces of humans, Jaguars, birds, and fish appeared almost animated, their features etched so precisely that they seemed ready to move, to speak, to act. Hands reaching, mouths open in silent song or speech, eyes wide with intent. Each gesture was frozen yet alive, capturing moments that the Mocha deemed worthy of preservation, worthy of honoring in clay. The artisans worked slowly, deliberately, their fingers molding the clay with reverence, applying pigments derived from minerals and plants. Every line, curve, and indentation carried meaning. Some depicted warriors and priests performing rituals by riverbanks, offering gifts to the gods, or invoking protection for their communities. Others showed scenes of domestic life, mothers cradling infants, men weaving nets, people gathering in marketplaces, each activity connected to the flow of sustenance and society. But beyond these tangible stories, the vessel held something subtler, a quiet resonance that transcended time, a sense that the objects themselves absorbed the intentions, hopes, and dreams of those who shaped them. Even before it was fired in the kiln, the clay seemed to carry an awareness, a responsiveness to the hands that formed it, bending gently under pressure, returning to a smooth shape, holding the memory of each touch. The firing process was more than technical, it was ceremonial. As the heat from the kiln transformed clay into ceramic, the vessel hardened yet retained the energy, the imprint of every hand, the essence of every intention. Those who observed believed that the vessel, once complete, could hold not only physical matter, liquids, grains, seeds, but also the ephemeral currents of thought, aspiration, and dream. In the villages, the vessel was treated with respect. It was not left carelessly on the ground or stored haphazardly. Instead, it was placed in quiet corners, on raised platforms, near sacred spaces where the rhythms of daily life met the sacredness of belief. It could hold maize, chicha, or water for ritual purposes, each offering a link between human activity and divine acknowledgement. As the sun traveled across the sky, light shifted on its surface, revealing subtleties in the carving that changed the perception of its scenes. A jaguar's gaze seemed to follow the viewer, a bird's wings appeared to lift, and figures seemed to turn ever so slightly, caught between the material and the imagined. Observers often remarked upon a sense of quiet movement, a pulse that seemed to emanate from within the clay, connecting the present to the distant hands that had created it. Time itself seemed to fold within the vessel, passed from hand to hand, from family to family, from village to temple. It carried the imprint of centuries of human interaction. Each person who touched it added their presence, a subtle layer of memory that became part of its essence. Generations of Moche people, living along the northern coast of Peru, depended on such vessels not only for utility, but for continuity. They carried knowledge, rituals, and social cohesion, and in these objects, the past and the present were intimately intertwined. Even long after the fall of the Moche civilization, vessels like this one survived, buried in tombs, hidden in sands, preserved in dry valleys. Archaeologists, discovering them centuries later, marveled not only at their craftsmanship but at the sense of life that seemed embedded in the ceramics. When lifted from the earth, they felt weight both physical and historical. The intricate faces and gestures appeared to hold stories beyond written record, speaking of ritual, reverence, and the intricate dance between humans and their environment. Scholars traced the artistry, noting the mastery in proportion, form, and narrative composition. Yet no analysis could fully account for the sensation of vitality that seemed to radiate from these vessels, the quiet hum of human intention, the echo of ancient hands shaping clay, and the dreams that had been folded into every curve, every line, and every indentation. In the quiet of night, when the moon illuminated the valleys and the stars reflected in the rivers, the vessel appeared to transform. The figures seemed to breathe, gestures extending, eyes opening wider. Shadows shifted across its surface, creating the illusion of subtle movement, as though the scenes captured in clay were stepping out of the past, performing rituals in silence, dancing in patterns known only to the river, the wind, and the unseen forces of the cosmos. Local legends spoke of vessels that held dreams, that captured intentions and prayers, and that carried them through time. Families would place offerings beside them, whisper wishes into their open mouths, and leave the vessel to commune with forces unseen. It became both a tool and a medium, bridging the physical and spiritual, the tangible and the imagined, the mundane and the sacred. Travelers, passing through valleys and settlements, were often drawn to these vessels. Even without knowledge of their origins, they felt an inexplicable pull, a quiet connection to distant lives, the rhythm of ancient hands, and the subtle energy of creation. Some reported dreams in which they walked through Moche villages, observing rituals, markets, and festivals, following the vessel as it guided them from scene to scene, story to story, dream to dream. In these nocturnal visions, the vessel became a guide, a silent companion that navigated time and memory, leading the dreamer through the cycles of life, death, celebration, and reflection that had been encoded in clay so long ago. The vessel's endurance was remarkable. Many other objects had cracked, faded, or been lost to decay, yet it survived, preserved in tombs, forgotten corners, and dry sands. Its continued existence became a testament to the skill, patience, and vision of its creators, as well as the subtle reverence with which it had been treated across generations. Even now, modern observers could feel its presence, a quiet weight of history pressing gently into awareness, encouraging contemplation, imagination, and connection to a distant, vibrant world. Each detail, from the delicate curl of a finger to the expression of a face, carried intention. The animals depicted, jaguars, birds, fish, were not random. They symbolized power, fertility, vigilance, and connection to natural forces. Each scene told a story that extended beyond the immediate, suggesting relationships, beliefs, and the subtle interconnectedness of all life. When the vessel was held, it was not merely an artifact, it became a bridge. The hands that touched it could feel the pulse of time, the resonance of human effort, and the quiet echo of rituals, dreams, and life itself. To observe it, to contemplate it, was to enter a dialogue with the past, to perceive the artistry, devotion, and subtle magic that survived in form, texture, and shadow. In quiet moments, when one traced the lines, the eyes, the gestures, and the flowing patterns, it was as if the vessel spoke not in words but in rhythm, in movement, in memory. It held the dreams of its creators, the intentions of those who had used it, and the silent stories of the generations that followed. Across valleys, rivers, and centuries, the vessel endured, carrying within it the pulse of life, the devotion of a civilization, and the quiet continuity of human imagination. And as the sun sets over the northern Peruvian valleys, the clay vessel rests, its form softened by the fading light, yet vibrating subtly with memory, intention, and possibility. The figures, frozen yet alive, remain dancing in shadow, holding dreams in a timeless embrace, inviting anyone who observes to enter a quiet meditation on life, creation, and the enduring rhythm of human presence in the world. The blade that remembered victory. The sword rested quietly within its silk-lined scabbard, its polished surface reflecting a light that seemed older than time itself. The air around it was cool and still, as if even the passing centuries had chosen to tread lightly, respecting the weight of history embedded in this artifact. It was no ordinary weapon, nor a mere symbol of conquest. It was the sword of Gujian, the blade that had witnessed victories and defeats, despair and hope, life and death, and yet had endured with a clarity and resilience that seemed almost supernatural. Forged in the state of Yue over 2.5 millennia ago, it was a marvel of metallurgy, its steel so pure and sharp that legends spoke of its ability to cut through iron as if it were silk. Even more remarkable, after thousands of years submerged in the waters of a tomb, it remained untarnished, uncorroded, gleaming as if it had been crafted yesterday, as if the hands that had shaped it had whispered secrets into the steel itself, secrets of persistence, courage, and the subtle art of survival. To hold the sword was to feel the pulse of ancient battles, the rhythm of clashing armies, the tension before decisive movements, and the serene focus of a king whose gaze was fixed upon the horizon of victory. King Gujian himself had once carried it, a ruler of Yue who had endured captivity, humiliation, and despair at the hands of rival states, only to return to his homeland with patience, cunning, and a heart unbroken. The sword, silent in its brilliance, carried the memory of every decision, every strategy, and every quiet moment of reflection that had guided the king through those years of adversity. Its edge, impossibly thin yet unyielding, seemed to capture light differently at every angle, refracting the ambient glow into a soft shimmer, as if the blade itself breathed, stretching across time, acknowledging the presence of those who approached it with reverence. Scholars who examined the sword centuries later marveled at its construction. The alloying of metals, the patterning of the steel, and the method of tempering created a blade that combined flexibility with extraordinary hardness. Each strike, each parry imagined in battle, left no mark upon it. Each human emotion, each strategic thought embedded in the mind of its wielder seemed absorbed and retained within the very essence of the metal. But beyond the technical marvel lay something more ineffable, a resonance of memory and intent. The sword was not only a weapon, but a witness, a silent companion that had accompanied a king through despair and triumph alike. Those who approached it often felt a subtle energy, a quiet vibration that suggested the presence of history condensed into an object, reminding them that courage, patience, and resilience could endure in ways the mind could scarcely measure. The sword had been submerged for centuries in a tomb near Jiangling, wrapped carefully and hidden away with other treasures. The water, cold and still, seemed to preserve not just the steel, but the memory of all it had known. When it was finally unearthed in the modern era, the clarity of its blade stunned observers, defying expectations, defying logic, and demanding respect. In quiet moments, one could imagine King Gujian sitting alone, polishing the blade with the same care that generations later would witness in archaeologists' meticulous hands. The light of early morning caught the surface of the sword, and for an instant, it seemed to flicker with the ghost of his eyes. Steady, calculating, yet filled with a fierce serenity. The sword also held lessons. It spoke of patience, years of captivity endured without bitterness, years of plotting and learning, while appearing submissive to enemies. It spoke of endurance, how one could withstand humiliation and emerge stronger, tempered like the steel from which the blade was forged. It whispered of vigilance, of the necessity of awareness, focus, and the quiet cultivation of skill in both mind and body. Warriors, scholars, and kings alike have looked upon the sword and felt its presence as more than metal. It was an extension of strategy, of wisdom, of deliberate patience. The hilt, adorned simply yet elegantly, suggested that true power needed no ostentation. It required only balance, grip, and trust between the hand and the instrument. The scabbard, preserved with equal care, seemed almost to embrace the sword, keeping it close, protective, yet ready to release it into action at the perfect moment. Over time, stories grew around the sword. Travelers spoke of it as a talisman of resilience, a vessel for the spirit of the king who had wielded it. Some whispered that if one meditated before it, tracing its lines, imagining the battles it had witnessed, they could feel the rhythm of history, the quiet cadence of decision-making, and even glimpse moments of courage crystallized in stillness. In the evenings, when sunlight filtered through lattice windows, shadows fell across the sword in patterns that seemed to move, almost imperceptibly. The blade would catch a glint here, a shimmer there, suggesting movement, a dance frozen yet alive, a reflection of the king's enduring vigilance. In dreams one could imagine following the sword through battlefields, feeling the weight of responsibility, the tension before conflict, the fleeting moments of strategy and instinct. The sharp edge became a symbol, not of violence alone, but of precision, clarity, and the ethical wielding of power. The sword also held a quiet warning. It reminded those who approached it that all victories required preparation, patience, and sometimes suffering. The gleam of the steel could not erase the shadows of struggle, but it could illuminate the path for those who understood its lessons. Across centuries, the sword had survived tombs, floods, wars, and neglect, yet it remained untouched by rust, decay, or the erosion of time. Each line in the metal was like a line of a story, a chronicle of human endeavor, discipline, and vision. To gaze upon it was to understand that legacy was not measured by wealth, territory, or fleeting fame, but by the endurance of one's character, the subtlety of one's strategies, and the quiet accumulation of wisdom across years. In silent rooms, surrounded by modern glass and careful preservation, the sword still communicated. The light caught its edges, shadows played across its form, and the mind, attuned to contemplation, could perceive the rhythm of centuries folded into steel. The blade that remembered victory became more than an artifact. It was a teacher, a silent guide through the currents of patience, focus, and resilience. Even now, imagining its weight in hand, the cool touch of metal, the balance between grip and motion, one could sense the presence of King Gojun, sitting quietly, preparing, reflecting, and waiting for the perfect moment. The sword was a testament to human ingenuity, endurance, and the remarkable ability to transform suffering into strength. Its existence bridged millennia, connecting the modern observer to a distant world, a distant mind, and a distant spirit. And as one let the gaze linger, tracing its edge, imagining the battles, the lessons, the patience it had witnessed, a quiet calm settled over the mind, a sense of connection to history, mastery, and the enduring rhythm of human courage. The blade remembered victory, not as a fleeting triumph, but as the quiet accumulation of resilience, foresight, and deliberate action, echoing softly in the mind of anyone who paused long enough to listen to its silent song. The gold that whispered secrets. The treasure lay beneath layers of earth and stone, forgotten by time, yet alive with stories long silenced. Buried near the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the awful treasure had waited patiently, hidden from the eyes of empires, concealed from the march of centuries, until the day it was rediscovered. Among its contents were 36 gold coins, each stamped with the authority and artistry of a bygone era, and a single large gold medallion, heavy in hand and rich with intricate designs that glimmered faintly even after centuries underground. The coins, small and smooth, carried more than the value of their gold. They bore witness to a time of faith, commerce, and quiet devotion. The medallion, with its delicate embossing and meticulous craftsmanship, seemed almost to hum with memory, resonating with the prayers, ambitions, and whispered secrets of those who had touched it, held it, and revered it. To hold one of the coins was to feel the pulse of a bustling city in the 7th century, to imagine the traders, the temple servants, the pilgrims who had passed through the streets of Jerusalem, their voices echoing faintly across the ages, mingling with the prayers offered to the heavens. Each coin bore inscriptions and designs that spoke of authority, of governance, of the delicate balance between power and belief. And yet, beyond their material form, they carried an essence, a quiet echo of lives lived with care and intention, of small acts of devotion and of great gestures of courage, etched into metal and preserved by time itself. The medallion, larger and more ornate, seemed almost like a map of thought and intention. Its curves and lines traced patterns that were both symbolic and functional, revealing the aesthetics of a people who understood that beauty and meaning were inseparable. The gold, warm and luminous, reflected light as though carrying the very sun within its folds, casting faint glimmers upon the walls of the chamber where it had rested for centuries. When archaeologists first uncovered the treasure, brushing away layers of dust and soil, there was a quiet reverence in their movements, a sense that they were not merely unearthing metal but opening a window into human experience. The coins shimmered under the modern light, but they also held shadows of candlelit streets, of hands exchanging currency with careful attention, of merchants negotiating prices for grain, olive oil, and pottery. In each coin, the touch of a finger lingered, the intent of a transaction preserved alongside the artistry of its engraving, and in the medallion, there was a stillness that transcended human activity, a pause, a meditation, a record of devotion, perhaps even a talisman of protection, crafted with care and reverence. To gaze upon it was to feel a dialogue between past and present, a conversation that spanned centuries, bridging the gap between those who lived long ago and those who observe today. Jerusalem, in the 7th century, was a city alive with sacred energy. Pilgrims walked its streets, prayers rose from the Temple Mount, merchants plied their trades, and rulers governed with the awareness that every act, every word, every decision carried consequence. In this vibrant yet tense environment, treasures like the Ophel hoard were both practical and symbolic. The coins circulated, facilitating trade, sustaining families, and supporting the temple's needs. The medallion, less mobile, perhaps served as a ceremonial object, a symbol of devotion, of connection to the divine, or a protective emblem entrusted to a temple official or ruler. Yet over time, the treasure disappeared from sight, its surface covered with earth, its golden surface hidden beneath centuries of dust and decay. And in this concealment, it gained a new kind of magic. Unseen, untouched, it became a repository of memory, absorbing the quiet weight of centuries, the ebb and flow of human ambition, and the soft whispers of those long gone. The coins, once exchanged hurriedly in marketplaces, now rested silently, waiting to share their stories. The medallion, once held ceremonially, now radiated stillness, inviting contemplation and connection. When one imagines touching the treasure, running fingers along the smooth edges of coins, tracing the intricate designs of the medallion, there is a sense of continuity, of human presence persisting across time. The mind drifts to a city alive with sound and motion. The clatter of carts along stone streets, the soft hum of prayer, the gentle splash of water in fountains and aqueducts, the smell of spices and bread mingling in open-air markets. Each element, once mundane, becomes part of the treasure's story, encoded subtly into the very metal itself. And yet, even as the treasure speaks of everyday life, it also carries weightier narratives. The 7th century was an era of change, of empire and faith intertwined, of cities expanding, kingdoms rising and falling, and human aspiration pressing against the limits of survival. The coins and medallion bear witness to all of this. They are markers of power and devotion, objects that survived political upheaval, invasions, and the inexorable march of time. As the treasure sits quietly in the present, displayed behind glass, or preserved in careful hands, it invites meditation. The coins remind the observer of patience, of the quiet accumulation of value and meaning over time. The medallion suggests reflection, artistry, and the enduring resonance of faith and intention. Together they form a bridge between the past and present, a reminder that human experience is layered, intricate, and profoundly interconnected. In the quiet, when one imagines the treasure resting in its hidden chamber for centuries, there is almost a sense of dialogue. The coins murmur tales of bustling streets and whispered deals. The medallion hums faintly, carrying the stillness of prayer, of devotion, and of protection. And the mind, attuned to these subtle messages, drifts gently into reflection, imagining the continuity of life, the persistence of human intention, and the delicate ways in which memory is preserved. To meditate on the Ophel treasure is to enter a rhythm of contemplation. One can envision the hands that once held the coins, the reverent fingers tracing the medallion's designs, the soft murmur of prayers rising in the air. Time stretches, allowing the observer to move across centuries, to feel the pulse of a city, to touch the edges of human hope and fear, commerce and devotion. And in this meditation, there is comfort, there is connection, there is the quiet recognition that though centuries pass, though empires fall and rise again, some things endure: human intention, the artistry of creation, and the whispered secrets of treasures that wait patiently, watching, waiting, and inviting those who will listen. The gold itself seems to glow faintly, a soft warmth that is more than physical. resonating with the mind and spirit. Each coin in the medallion seemed to hold the same gentle power, a reminder that history is not only written in books or carved in stone, but also in the subtle, persistent traces left by human hands, choices, and care. And as one closes their eyes, imagining the treasure, imagining its light and weight, its intricate carvings, the quiet city streets it once moved through, the ritual hands that touched it, there is a slow unfolding of peace, a gentle drift into sleep, guided by the rhythm of time, the pulse of history, and the enduring whisper of gold that has waited patiently for centuries to share its story. The crystal that held light. The ewer rested quietly, a vessel of perfect clarity, carved from a single piece of rock crystal. Its surface shimmered faintly, catching the light and refracting it into subtle glimmers that danced across the walls of the chamber, soft and gentle, like sunlight filtering through a morning haze. Centuries had passed since the hands of Fatimid artisans in 10th century Egypt had shaped it, each delicate curve and carved flourish imbued with purpose, care, and artistry. The ewer was more than a vessel, it was a testament to patience, skill, and the reverence for beauty that transcends time. The crystal itself seemed almost alive, transparent yet luminous, holding within it a sense of calm and stillness, as if the essence of the Nile, the desert sun, and the whispers of the bustling markets had been captured within its very form. To touch it was to feel the cool smoothness of perfection, the subtle weight of history resting in your hands. The Fatimid artisans in their workshops had worked with devotion, polishing the crystal with tools and techniques honed over generations. They understood that the material demanded patience. It would not yield to impatience or haste. Every line, every indentation, every subtle curve was planned with precision, guided not only by the eye but by the heart, by a desire to create something that would endure, something that would communicate across centuries, something that would speak silently to those who would one day discover it. In the ewer's form, one could sense the fluidity of water, the gentle curve of its neck mirroring the flow of the Nile itself. Its handle, carved with exquisite care, suggested balance, grace, and the elegance of movement, while its spout hinted at the precise knowledge of function and form. It was an object meant to be admired, held, and used, yet also preserved, as though the crystal had absorbed the intention of its creators, that beauty and utility could coexist, that material and spirit could merge into a single enduring expression. As centuries passed, the ewer traveled from hand to hand, through the silent halls of palaces, across quiet market streets, and eventually into the hidden folds of history, where it lay undisturbed. The crystal preserved not only its form but the echoes of countless interactions, the soft murmur of servants carrying it, the whispered admiration of nobles who gazed upon it, the gentle trickle of water that once flowed through it, connecting human need with artistry. When modern eyes finally beheld it again, there was astonishment. How could something so delicate, so transparent, have survived centuries untouched, unblemished, immune to the decay that claimed so many other treasures? The ewer's surface glowed softly under display lights, but there was more than light within it. There was memory. There was intention. There was the slow rhythm of centuries compressed into a single object, waiting patiently for anyone who would listen to its silent story. In the quiet, one could imagine the workshops of Cairo, the hands of skilled artisans tracing the crystal, guided by knowledge and intuition alike. The tools scraped and polished, coaxed and shaped, until the ewer emerged perfect, a vessel that could hold water, oil, or wine, yet simultaneously hold the gaze of all who admired it. And as one imagined the artisans at work, one could hear the quiet rhythm of their lives, the soft murmurs of prayer, the ambient hum of the city beyond the workshop walls, the careful attention to detail, the patience that stretched over days, months, and perhaps even years. The ewer, in turn, absorbed this energy. Its crystal seemed to carry a pulse, faint yet perceptible, a heartbeat that resonated with the subtle presence of those who had created it, used it, and revered it. To meditate on the ewer was to drift gently into reflection. One could imagine water flowing from its spout, catching the sun and casting tiny reflections on the walls. Each droplet was a memory, each ripple a whisper of life in 10th century Cairo. The shape of the vessel guided the eye in quiet curves, leading thought along a path of serenity, patience, and careful observation. And within this reflection, there was a connection. The ewer bridged time, linking the present observer to artisans long gone, to the bustling streets of a city alive with commerce, devotion, and daily rituals. Its clarity mirrored the clarity of intention, each line, each curve, each surface polished with care, reminding one that the truest beauty emerges from patience, skill, and dedication. The gold and silver vessels that might have accompanied it paled beside its transparency, for the ewer did not need color to command attention. It commanded it through stillness, through light, through the way it seemed to hold not just liquid, but essence. And as one imagined the objects it once contained, the ceremonies it might have accompanied, the quiet reverence with which it was handled. There was a gentle unfolding of imagination. One could see the courtyards of Fatimid palaces, the sound of fountains, the scent of incense, the soft rustle of silk garments as servants and nobles moved with grace. And in this scene, the ewer remained central, a silent observer, a keeper of beauty and memory, a vessel that held more than water, it held time itself. Through it, one could feel the rhythm of daily life, the preparation of meals, the ritual washing before prayer, the careful pouring of water into smaller vessels for guests or for sacred purposes. Each action was amplified by the ewer's presence, transformed into a meditation on care, balance, and elegance. The crystal seemed to absorb light differently with each glance, revealing facets that were hidden at first, only to become apparent as the mind slowed, attuned to observation. It was a teacher of attention, of patience, of quiet reflection. And in the stillness, one could almost hear the whispers of the past, the voices of artisans instructing apprentices, the sighs of courtiers admiring its form, the careful prayers of those who revered the vessel for its beauty and its functionality. The ewer also spoke of endurance. It had survived centuries of change, of political upheaval, of shifting tastes and fortunes. It had survived neglect and rediscovery alike. And yet it remained whole, luminous, and unbroken, a testament to the skill of its creators and the resilience of their vision. To meditate upon it was to meditate upon time itself. Each moment of reflection became a ripple that extended across centuries, connecting observer, artifact, and creator in a seamless thread of attention and care. The mind could drift, imagining the crystal as it first emerged from the hands of the Fatimid artisans, polished to perfection, its surfaces catching the desert sun and reflecting it in infinite tiny patterns. The imagination could trace water flowing through it, golden light filtering through its translucent walls, shadows dancing softly on the surfaces of palace courtyards, the scent of spices and incense mingling with the subtle weight of history carried within crystal. And as one's thoughts lingered on these images, a calmness settled over the mind. There was a gentle awareness of continuity, of human creativity stretching across millennia, of the patience, skill, and reverence that could create something enduring and beautiful. In the quiet, the ewer seemed to hold not just the observer's attention, but their breath, their thoughts, their sense of time itself. It became a vessel for reflection, meditation, and connection, a reminder that even the smallest act of care, of creation, could resonate far beyond the moment, far beyond the hands that shaped it. The crystal that held light was more than a mere object of artistry. It was a bridge across time, a silent teacher of patience, a keeper of beauty, and a companion for the mind that sought calm and contemplation. As the observer imagined tracing its curves, imagining the water it once contained, the hands that held it, and the artisans who gave it form, there was a gentle drift into serenity, a slow unfolding of peace, and a deepening sense of connection to history, artistry, and the quiet endurance of human intention. The ewer waited patiently, as it had for centuries, ready to share its story with those who would listen. Its crystal walls reflecting not only light, but the enduring rhythm of human care, creativity, and contemplation. The weights that balance the world. Far to the north, where the soil freezes before the breath of winter even finishes leaving your lungs, the rivers once flowed like silver veins through the land. Traders followed their bends, long before anyone called the place Russia. They came with furs and honey, with wax and amber, with voices that carried the tones of distant coasts. And among these merchants, moving from the cold of Novgorod to the warmth of Byzantium, there appeared objects that seemed to belong to no single people. Bronze weights, shaped with strange mathematical precision, their edges forming a harmony that spoke a language older than maps. They were small things, barely fitting in the palm, yet each one was balanced with such perfection that it could measure not just silver or grain, but trust itself. The people who used them never knew who had first cast them. They called them simply merchant's truth, small tokens of fairness in a world where most trades depended on faith. They were shaped as cuboctahedrons, forms that even in modern times carry the signature of geometry's great thinkers, a shape of 12 edges, 8 triangles, and 6 squares, resting in flawless symmetry. And though the traders of the 9th century had no need for the words of Archimedes, they held in their hands his very language, translated into metal. When one holds such a weight, the cold of the bronze presses through the skin and lingers. Imagine that stillness, that faint heaviness, not just of the metal but of time itself. The air would have smelled faintly of soot and pine tar, of wet wool cloaks drying by the fire after a long journey. Coins would clink in leather pouches, barter would hum like the low murmur of a prayer. And amidst that, the small bronze polyhedron would gleam in lamplight, its facets worn smooth by centuries of hands. No one quite remembers who made the first of these weights. Archaeologists later found them buried near the rivers Volga and Dnieper, in the remains of trade posts that once linked Vikings to Persians, Byzantines to the steppe nomads. They were found alongside glass beads from the Levant, scales from Arabia, and coins bearing Greek and Arabic inscriptions, a testimony to a world far more connected than we imagine. Each weight was carefully cast in bronze, and sometimes lead-filled to perfect its mass. But what was remarkable was not merely their use, it was their perfection. Even after centuries beneath soil, their calibration remained precise. In an age before digital balances, before machines and factories, someone, somewhere, had crafted symmetry that could whisper to mathematicians even now. It's said that these shapes echo the works of Archimedes himself, who 2 millennia before had studied how the world could be measured by form. In his geometry, the cuboctahedron was an ideal, a balance between cube and octahedron, between earth and air. To the philosophers of the Mediterranean, such a form was more than mathematics, it was the reflection of harmony in the cosmos. Perhaps the artisans who shaped these northern weights did not know Archimedes by name, but they inherited his idea, that perfection could be held, that fairness could be forged. Now imagine one of those artisans, perhaps in Bulgar or Kiev, working in a dim workshop lit by a single flame. The bronze cools slowly after pouring, steam curling upward like breath. He turns the weight in his hands, checking its edges, trimming the tiny imperfections. Outside, the market buzzes, a dozen languages colliding in the air, Norse, Turkic, Persian, Greek. He tests the weight against another, comparing balance by touch and sound, listening for harmony. Each hammer strike in his small foundry is a promise that trade will be fair, that one man's measure of grain will match another's of silver. Centuries later, when the archaeologists uncovered them, the weights were coated in patina, that deep green sheen that bronze earns through patience. Some were found near Staraya Ladoga, others in burial mounds of Rus princes, others still in merchant caches. It was clear that they had traveled far, and so they told a quiet story, not of war or conquest, but of exchange, of a world held together not by swords but by balance. The rivers were their highways. In spring, when the ice broke and the waters ran fast, boats laden with goods drifted south, their sails catching winds from the north. The air shimmered with moisture, and the sun stayed low, casting long reflections over the waves. On board, alongside the furs and beeswax, lay the scales, small bronze balances, their pans perfectly level and their cuboctahedral weights gleaming softly in the light. Trade was not just commerce, it was conversation, a negotiation of trust. When a merchant offered a silver coin for a measure of amber or fur, the weight on the other side of the scale was a quiet assurance, proof that what was fair in one port would be fair in another. The very idea of law, of justice, of equality, it all began with these small acts of balance. Over time, these weights became symbolic. To own one was to be known as honest. When disputes arose, traders would call upon the merchant's truth. They'd bring out the balanced weights, proof against deceit. In a way, those bronzes became the silent judges of the market square. There's something humbling in that, the idea that civilization depends not on the sword, but on the scale. When one looks closely at a cuboctahedron, one can see the hidden rhythm of the world, the equal tension of edges, the perfection of faces. In the 9th century, when such things were made by hand, that symmetry spoke of something sacred. Perhaps that's why, centuries later, they were buried with merchants in their graves. To take a perfect weight into the afterlife was to carry balance itself, a token of order amidst chaos. In the cold soil, they slept for 1,000 years. The rivers shifted course, kingdoms rose and fell, yet the weights endured, their purpose unchanged. When they were finally unearthed, sunlight touched them again after centuries of darkness, and they glimmered faintly, as though the world itself remembered. One can imagine the archaeologist's hands trembling slightly, brushing away the earth from the small bronze shape. The edges emerge first, then the smooth planes, then the familiar geometry. To the trained eye, it is instantly recognizable, but beneath that recognition lies something deeper, a quiet awe, for in this small object lies a philosophy, that fairness is not invention, but discovery, that even in the most primitive markets, humans sought not chaos, but balance. And perhaps that's why, even now, when people speak of justice, of equality, of truth, the language remains the same. We weigh arguments, we balance choices, we measure worth. The weights of Archimedes did not merely calibrate trade, they calibrated conscience. In the quiet northern evenings when snow covered the roads and trade ceased, one can imagine a merchant sitting by his fire, his bronze weights lined on the table before him. The crackle of pine logs fills the room, the wind presses against the shutters, howling softly like a distant ocean. He picks up one of the cuboctahedrons and turns it between his fingers. Its cool surface catches the firelight, glowing faintly red at the edges. He remembers his travels, the ports of the Black Sea, the markets of Constantinople, the spice traders from the south. He recalls bargains struck and friendships made, not by language but by fairness. He smiles. To him this weight is not metal, it's memory. Outside the snow keeps falling, And inside, balance holds. These artifacts today rest in museums, behind glass, catalogued by number and weight. Visitors glance at them and move on, not realizing they're looking at one of humanity's oldest promises, that truth can be measured. The snow had melted again by spring, and with it came the restless sound of movement, wheels creaking, hooves splashing through thawed mud, the voices of traders returning to the rivers. The Dnieper would soon be open, its ice breaking into drifting shards that glittered like cracked glass in the sun. Along its banks, men prepared boats of pine and birch, patched with tar and rope. In one of these vessels, a merchant named Oleg adjusted his cargo: bundles of fur, jars of honey sealed with wax, fine iron tools wrapped in cloth, and beneath it all a small chest lined with wool. Inside that chest rested a set of bronze cuboctahedral weights, his truth stones, as he called them. Each one bore faint traces of engraving, rubbed smooth by decades of use. Their surfaces gleamed in the morning light, like old coins of some forgotten empire. They were heavier than they looked. He had tested them 1,000 times, on docks and in markets from Ladoga to Kiev. Not once had they failed him. The scales always balanced. As the river widened and the current carried them south, Oleg thought often of the hands that had first made those weights. Some said they came from the east, forged by artisans of the Caliphate, where geometry and faith met in pattern and precision. Others claimed they came from Byzantium, that city of gold and smoke, where merchants walked under domes painted with saints and mosaics glittering like stars. But Oleg suspected they were older still. The balance was too perfect, the casting too fine. He believed they were ancient relics from the scholars of Greece, or the philosophers of Alexandria. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of travel, when his companions slept, and only the whisper of the current filled the air, he'd take one of the weights from the chest and hold it close, tracing its edges. He felt that it contained something more than measure, a stillness, a memory of balance so perfect that the world itself seemed quieter when he held it. The journey to Constantinople was long. They would pass through forests thick with mist, through marshlands where the reeds whispered secrets to the wind. They would trade at small river towns, exchanging fur for salt, beeswax for silk thread, and at each port, Oleg would bring out his scales. The merchants who traded with him trusted the fairness of his hand because of those weights. They said he was a man who balanced even his soul. By the time he reached the great city, weeks had passed. Constantinople rose before him like a vision, a city of marble and water, where domes caught the light of dawn and ships filled the Golden Horn like leaves in a vast pond. He had seen it before, but it always felt unreal, as though it had been carved not by hands but by light itself. In the market square, trade was a symphony: shouts, clinks, laughter, and the rhythm of the scales. A merchant from Syria offered him dates and fine cloth. Another from Egypt displayed alabaster jars filled with oil. Oleg watched as weights of every kind came into view: stone, lead, bronze, some crude, some refined. But none had the calm perfection of his cuboctahedrons. He drew them from the chest with care, placing one upon the scale. Its facets caught the sunlight, and the Greek merchant across from him raised his brows in curiosity. "From where?" the man asked, gesturing to the weight. Oleg smiled faintly. "From the north," he said. The merchant leaned closer, examining the smooth geometry. "No, not born there. Too old, too knowing." He lifted it gently, turning it in his hand. "This is knowledge made solid." Oleg said nothing, but in his heart he agreed. For a moment, amidst the noise of trade, the two men stood in silence, both watching the small bronze form that had traveled further than most men ever would. It was not just metal, it was a link, from the hands of an ancient mathematician to the fingers of a northern merchant, from one civilization's curiosity to another's trust. The distance between Archimedes and Oleg might have been centuries, yet here, at the center of the world's markets, their thoughts met in the language of balance. That night, after the deals were done and the fire burned low, Oleg sat by the harbor's edge. He watched the ship's reflections tremble in the water, each lantern shimmering like a restless star. He thought of how strange it was that something so small could bind so many worlds together. The weight rested beside him on a folded cloth. He reached out, set it on the stone ledge, and let it rest there for a moment. For a heartbeat, it seemed the night itself grew quieter. He thought of home, of the endless snows, of the quiet rhythm of rivers turning to ice. He thought of how each trade, each coin, each measure of grain, depended on faith not in gods or kings, but in the idea that one man's honesty could be understood by another's hand. And there, watching the ripples move beneath the moon, he realized that balance was not something that men invented. It was something they found, like a truth waiting patiently to be rediscovered. When he returned north months later, the weights still traveled with him. They aged as he did, their edges dulling, their color deepening into green, yet their precision remained perfect. He passed them to his son, who continued his work after him, then his grandson after that. By the time Oleg's name was forgotten, the weights had become heirlooms, silent companions of generations. Centuries later, when archaeologists uncovered them near the banks of the Volkhov River, they were puzzled. The weights did not match local designs. Their geometry was too exact, their forms too uniform. Some thought they were symbols of an ancient secret order, others that they were remnants of Greek influence. But when they were analyzed, the truth was simpler and more profound. They were tools of fairness. The patina still clung to them like moss on old stone, yet beneath it, their edges glimmered faintly, perfect as the day they were cast. Museums today hold them in quiet rooms. Visitors pass by, unaware that those small bronzes once linked continents. They are arranged in rows, labeled with measurements, dates, and provenance. Neat, sterile, silent. But if one could listen closely, perhaps in the hush of closing hours, one might still hear the echo of the markets, the murmur of trade, the soft hum of balance. In that silence, the weights rest as they always have, unbroken, unchanged, endlessly patient. They remind us that civilization does not rest on empires, but on equilibrium. On the idea that worth must be matched by worth, that fairness must have weight. And somewhere, perhaps in another riverbank yet unexcavated, another set still sleeps, untouched by centuries, their bronze hearts waiting for the light. The soil presses close, the water seeps gently through, and above, the wind moves across the empty plains. The world turns, the stars shift, but below, in darkness, the weights that balance the world still hold true. The stones that taught humanity. Beneath the wide Kenyan sky, the land of Lomekwi lies still. Its surface a quilt of ochre dust, dry grass and stone. The air hums faintly with heat, and the distant hum of insects is the only sound that carries across the plain. It is an ordinary landscape at first glance, but hidden beneath its soil rests a quiet revolution, one that would shape every mind, every tool, and every civilization that came after. 3.3 million years ago, this place was not so different. Trees leaned in the same sun, rivers cut their same slow lines through the earth, and small creatures scuttled between the roots. But in this ancient silence, a hand, rough, small, and uncertain, lifted a stone. That moment, unnoticed by the sky or the wind, may have been the first spark of thought beyond instinct. The Lomekwi stone tools are not polished or elegant. They are not the sleek blades of later Homo sapiens, nor the fine points of Neolithic hunters. They are rough, fractured, and crude, edges chipped by uncertain strikes. But they are something infinitely greater than their form. They represent the dawn of intention. The first time a being looked at a rock not as part of the earth, but as something that could become. Archaeologists unearthed them near Lake Turkana, scattered like echoes of trial and error, flakes, cores, and hammers. To most eyes, they seem unremarkable, indistinguishable from any broken stone. But when studied closely, the patterns appear deliberate. The marks show force applied at angles, an understanding, however primitive, that one shape could change another. Before Lomekwi, the world belonged to nature alone. After Lomekwi, it began to belong, even slightly, to thought. That shift would not happen again for another 500,000 years, when later species refined the idea. But here, at this dusty site in Kenya, some forgotten ancestor took the first step toward invention. Scientists debate who made them. Not Homo sapiens, not even Homo erectus. These tools are older. Perhaps it was Australopithecus afarensis, the species of the famous Lucy, or maybe another, now vanished hand. Whoever it was, they stood not in the glow of fire or beneath the roof of a shelter, but in the open savanna, holding a stone that might shape another. The story of Lomekwi is a story of smallness, not of grand monuments or mighty empires, but of the smallest possible miracle, choice. The choice to change something, to look at the raw earth and see potential. It's a thread that stretches from that first clumsy strike to the carving of temples, the forging of swords, and the building of cities. When archaeologists brushed away the soil, they realized what they were touching wasn't just rock, it was memory, not of individuals, but of the species itself, the echo of when thought began to wake. These stones are humanity before humanity existed, creation before words, and though they rest in silence, they whisper of everything that came after, the farmers who tilled, the architects who built, the thinkers who reasoned. Every invention, every art, every tool, all began here, in a moment when someone, perhaps frightened, perhaps curious, decided to shape the world. The sun still burns the same way it did then, falling over the same hills of Lomekwi. But the ground below remembers what it carried. The stones remain as teachers, older than writing, older than fire, older even than us. And if you stand there long enough, among the dust and silence, you might feel it too. The faint hum of beginnings, the first lesson of the earth itself, that everything starts with the courage to strike a stone, the stones that taught humanity. The landscape of Lomekwi remained unchanged for millions of years, yet beneath its surface, time had layered itself like sediment. When modern eyes finally came searching, The earth gave up its secret slowly, carefully, almost as if it knew the magnitude of what it held. The tools lay scattered, some half buried, others fully exposed, each one a silent witness to a moment of awakening so profound that it would ripple across epochs. Archaeologists arrived, tents pitched in the heat, dust clinging to every surface, notebooks open, cameras poised to capture even the faintest trace of antiquity. Each stone they lifted brought the distant past closer. Fingers traced the fractured edges, following the careful angles of a strike that had been applied with intention, with thought, with the curiosity that separates mere animal from the beginnings of humanity. Every chip in the Lamechwi tools spoke a language without words. Some were meant to split, some to cut, some perhaps to scrape, yet the exact use was less important than the revelation it carried. Whoever had shaped them had considered possibilities, even if unconsciously. The stones bore witness to the first deliberate interaction between mind and matter, to the recognition that the world could be altered, that nature could respond to intention. The heat of the Kenyan sun pressed down, making the bronze of modern tools glint faintly in the hands of the researchers as they compared them to these ancient stones. They marveled at the simplicity and the complexity coexisting in the same object. The Lamechwi stones were crude, yes, but perfect in their honesty. They carried no adornment, no refinement, only the pure imprint of decision and action. Some of the stones were flaked in such a way that they suggested repeated experimentation, a trial and error that spanned days, perhaps weeks. It was a pattern of learning, of understanding the limits and potentials of the materials at hand. Each small strike was a conversation across millennia, a dialogue that only the patient could hear. Imagine standing there, dust on your boots, the sun warming your shoulders, the wind carrying distant bird calls across the plain, and realizing that the smallest movement of a hand, the simplest act of striking stone, had begun a story that would stretch all the way to you. That your understanding, your civilization, your very ability to imagine and create, was built upon this quiet beginning. And yet, it was more than a story of stone. It was a story of thought emerging from the body of the earth. The maker, whoever they were, understood something that humans would later formalize into knowledge. That action and consequence are linked. That intention is as tangible as the tools it shapes. That understanding comes from touch, not just observation. The stones sat in display cases long after their discovery, catalogued meticulously, each chip and edge recorded in diagrams and photographs. Scholars wrote papers, debates arose over attribution and purpose, yet the stones themselves said nothing, remaining patient, as they always had, as they always would. They did not need explanation. Their very existence was enough. To hold one was to touch the mind of the past. The cool, rough texture carried the weight of time, the patience of an ancestor who had not yet given the world a name, who had not yet walked in cities, who had not yet spoken, and yet the thought was there, faint but undeniable, waiting for the world to notice. Across the ages, the Lamechwi tools remind us that progress is not sudden. It does not roar into being with fire and steel. It begins quietly, with a single hand, a single observation, a single strike. From that spark of understanding, civilizations rise, languages form, mathematics emerges, cities grow, art is created. Every polished bronze, every carved monument, every structure that touches the sky, all can trace their lineage back to that simple act, a mind meeting stone, and recognizing its potential. And in the quiet hours when the wind moves across the savannah, there is a resonance, faint, almost imperceptible, as if the stones themselves sigh in satisfaction. They know the story. They remember the first sparks of intention. They witness, silently, the unfolding of humanity. Even now, when researchers leave the site and the African sun sets over the hills, the stones remain, unchanged, unbroken, patient. They are older than kings, older than empires, older than writing. They are the first teachers, holding the first lessons, observation, experimentation, the courage to act, and the understanding that small actions can ripple outward into eternity. The land of Lamechwi stretches under the stars, quiet except for the whisper of the wind. And beneath its surface, the echoes of those earliest hands continue to speak, reminding anyone who will listen that the world itself can be shaped, and that the shaping begins with a single, deliberate choice. The ring that held an emperor's gaze. Beneath the golden light of the Roman sun, the city of Rome sprawled in grandeur and chaos, a web of marble temples, cobbled streets, and whispered power. The Tiber flowed steadily through the heart of the city, carrying the reflections of triumph and tragedy alike, as it had for centuries. In this vibrant, restless world, men and women lived and died under the shadow of emperors, their fates determined by whispers, politics, and the delicate glimmer of symbols of authority. Among those symbols, small and intimate, lay objects that held more than mere material value. One such object was a ring, A simple band set with a deep blue sapphire, unassuming at first glance, yet carrying the weight of an emperor's will, his desires, and his gaze. It is believed this ring once belonged to Gaius Julius Caesar, Augustus Germanicus, the infamous Emperor Caligula. Known for both his brilliance and his cruelty, Caligula's rule was a delicate balance of awe and terror. The sapphire ring, however, tells a quieter story. A story not of political maneuvering or scandal, but of the private power vested in a tiny circular band of metal and stone. To understand the significance of such a ring, one must imagine the world in which it was worn. The streets of Rome were crowded and noisy. Merchants called out from wooden stalls piled with olives, wine, and fabric. The chatter of citizens mingled with the clatter of chariots and the distant chant of soldiers marching through the forum. Over all of this, the emperor's image, his statues, his coins, his edicts, hung like a constant presence. But it was not the public grandeur alone that held power. It was the small objects, the subtle signals, the personal touches that whispered authority in every glance and gesture. The sapphire ring was more than a jewel. Its deep blue hue reflected the Mediterranean sky, and in the hands of the emperor, it became an extension of his will. Each time he raised it to gesture, to seal a document, or to point toward his intended justice or vengeance, the stone seemed to hold his intent. Artisans of the era, skilled beyond imagination, carved the metal to perfectly fit the wearer, and the sapphire was chosen not only for its beauty, but for its rarity, its durability, and its subtle association with wisdom and divine favor. Caligula, like many rulers of his time, understood the language of symbols intimately. Every object he touched, every item he wore, carried meaning. When he held the ring, it was a signal to those around him: loyalty, obedience, fear, and awe. And yet, there was a hidden poetry in the gesture. The ring could touch no one physically, yet its influence extended to the hearts and minds of all who glimpsed it. The ring itself, though small, was heavy with history even before Caligula wore it. Sapphires had traveled great distances, mined in lands beyond the empire, crossing mountains and deserts, passing from hand to hand of traders, jewelers, and kings. By the time it reached Rome, it carried stories of distant skies, windswept plains, and the patient labor of countless miners and artisans. Its deep blue surface held tiny imperfections, each one a record of the earth itself, and each reflecting a fragment of the world's memory. Imagine Caligula holding this ring in his palm during a quiet morning in the Palatine Hill Palace. The air was warm, scented faintly with the smoke of incense burning in golden braziers. Servants moved silently in the background, tending to clothes, scrolls, and preparations for the day. The emperor's gaze was distant, focused perhaps on strategy, perhaps on whims. He would turn the ring in his fingers, feeling the cool smoothness of the sapphire, tracing the edge with his thumb, and in that simple act, commanding worlds both real and imagined. Outside, Rome continued its endless motion. Soldiers trained in the courtyards, their armor clanking rhythmically. The marketplace buzzed with negotiation, the language of commerce bridging cultures from across the empire. Merchants spoke Greek, Latin, and languages unknown, while goods traveled from Egypt, Gaul, Hispania, and beyond. And yet, amid this constant flow of life, the ring remained a quiet center of authority. The sapphire itself was believed to have properties beyond mere decoration. Scholars and philosophers whispered of sapphire's ability to calm the mind, to sharpen the senses, and even to protect against envy or harm. Whether Caligula believed these things or not, the effect was evident. The ring's presence seemed to focus his attention, lending a stillness to his decisions even when the world around him swirled with intrigue and potential danger. It is remarkable, if one pauses to consider, that such a small object could contain so much. For every battle fought, every decree issued, every word of law passed through the Senate, the ring accompanied the emperor. It was there when decisions of life and death were made, when alliances were forged or broken, when the invisible threads of power wove themselves tightly around the city. Archaeological records suggest that rings like this were often buried with their owners or lost during turbulent periods, disappearing into the tides of history. Some may have been melted down, their metals reused, their stones repurposed. Yet those that survived carry more than wealth. They carry insight. To look upon a ring once worn by Caligula is to glimpse not just craftsmanship but the essence of rulership in ancient Rome, the interplay of authority, presence, and subtle influence. The sapphire, with its deep reflective surface, captured light in a way that seemed almost alive. When the sun touched its facets, it threw faint specks of blue onto the emperor's hand, as if the sky itself had been compressed into gemstone form. It is easy to imagine how those who saw it might feel a mixture of fear, admiration, and fascination. The ring was a silent extension of the emperor's gaze, a reminder that even the smallest objects could wield immense power. Consider the artisans who created it. Their hands, long gone, had labored meticulously, cutting and polishing the sapphire, setting it into metal with precision and care. They did not know who would wear it, but they understood their craft. Every line, every polish, every curve was intentional, designed to endure not just time, but the weight of history itself. In quiet moments, perhaps Caligula himself reflected on the chain of effort that had brought the ring to him. The miners who unearthed the gem, the traders who transported it across deserts and seas, the jewelers who shaped it. Each step a link in a chain of human endeavor, now converging on a single hand. And yet, for all its journey, the ring's presence was intimate and personal, a constant companion, resting on the emperor's finger as he moved through halls of power, gardens, and private chambers. Even in myth, the sapphire held significance. The deep blue symbolized the heavens, divine favor, and clarity of thought. In a world where rulers often invoked the gods to justify their actions, a ring set with a stone that mirrored the sky was more than ornamental. It was a symbol of celestial authority, a bridge between the mortal and the divine. Imagine Caligula walking through the Palatine gardens, his finger catching the morning light. The reflection danced across the marble fountains and trimmed hedges. Birds flitted between olive trees, their songs unnoticed in the grand march of imperial life, yet their presence part of the living city around him. The ring, resting against his flesh, seemed to anchor him, connecting his mortal body to the expanse of time, the lineage of rulers before him, and the eyes of citizens who might never know of its existence, yet felt its influence through the aura of command it carried. Even the weight of a ring can be felt. Though small, it presses against the finger, a subtle, constant sensation. The emperor would sense it with every gesture, every document signed, every proclamation given. In this quiet feedback, in this tiny, continuous presence, power became tangible, almost touchable. Through the corridors of history, the sapphire has endured as witness to empire, the rise and fall of power, and the lives of those who navigated both. It reminds us that history is often carried not in monumental buildings alone, but in the objects held close, the artifacts that connect hand, mind, and will across time. And so the ring rests, imagined or real, in memory and museum alike, a conduit to a world long past. It speaks softly of authority, of the care with which power can be carried, of the intimate relationship between ruler and symbol. To hold it in the mind's eye is to feel a pulse of Rome itself, the clamor of markets, the shadowed whispers of senators, the sun over the forum, and the quiet, constant gaze of a man who wore the world on a single finger. The sapphire ring endured, slipping through the hands of history as silently as a shadow moves across a marble floor. Centuries passed, and the world changed. Rome, once the epicenter of power, gave way to decay and transformation. Its temples crumbled, its forums buried beneath layers of earth and memory. Empires rose and fell, yet small objects carried by hands careful or careless survived when cities did not. The ring, set with its deep blue gem, traveled through time like a silent witness, its story hidden until discovered by those attuned to the whispers of the past. By the early centuries of the Middle Ages, the ring had disappeared from records. Legends clung to it, as they did to many treasures of antiquity, but no chronicler could trace its path. Some said it had been taken east, into the Byzantine lands, passed among emperors and generals as a token of favor or dominance. Others whispered it was lost in the chaos of Rome's sack, hidden by a loyal servant or melted down for its metal. Yet the sapphire remained, for stones endure where men falter. The journey of the ring was quiet but relentless. In the hands of collectors, perhaps a forgotten cardinal, a noble, or a wealthy merchant, it continued to gleam. Its presence influenced not through decree or command, but through perception. Those who held it felt a subtle shift, an unspoken authority, a gravity that could not be measured in coins or crowns. It is said that the weight of history is heavier than the weight of gold, and in the sapphire's gleam, one could sense that weight. During the Renaissance, when the world rediscovered the knowledge and artifacts of antiquity, the ring surfaced in whispered accounts. Scholars and connoisseurs noted its existence in letters and private inventories. Its deep blue was remarked upon, and its provenance speculated. Yet its full story remained a secret known only to the few who had held it. The gem, polished by hands long gone, retained a brilliance that no passage of time could dim. In a time of reawakening, when art, philosophy, and science were expanding human understanding, the ring became more than a jewel. It became a symbol of the continuity of power, of vision, and of humanity's fascination with the objects that shape our perceptions. Consider the hands that touched it in this era. A scholar in Florence examining the sapphire under candlelight, noting its clarity and depth. A merchant in Venice, turning the band over carefully, calculating its value. A collector in Rome comparing it to coins, cameos, and gemstones gathered from across the world. Each hand added a layer of story. Each gaze imprinted a fragment of thought onto the gem itself. The ring absorbed attention and intention, and through that, it continued to exert its quiet influence. The sapphire, like all precious stones, was more than its chemical composition. It was a vessel of reflection, capturing not only light, but desire, ambition, and awe. To hold it was to feel the pulse of centuries, the heartbeat of emperors, the cautious excitement of merchants, the reverent curiosity of scholars. Every facet mirrored the world it traversed, each edge refracting history, as if the past were a prism and the ring its lens. In the palace chambers of Italy, where tapestries whispered stories of kings and saints, the ring may have rested on a velvet cushion or slipped onto a finger during a private moment. Those who saw it noted the deep color, the calm brilliance that seemed almost unnatural. It drew attention without demanding it, a subtle but undeniable presence. In an age of politics, diplomacy, and intrigue, such an object carried power far beyond its modest size. Historians and jewelers, examining rings of the Roman period centuries later, speculated endlessly. They considered whether it had been worn during critical events, during the plotting of a coup, the signing of treaties, the quiet reflections in candlelit halls. Though specifics were unknowable, the impact of such an object is clear. A physical manifestation of authority, a focal point for influence and perception. The ring shaped not policy, but presence, and presence is a currency that lasts longer than gold. By the 19th and early 20th centuries, the ring reappeared in private collections, its history carefully noted, though gaps remained. Museums and antiquarians marveled at the survival of a gemstone and a band that could once belong to an emperor infamous for both grandeur and cruelty. They studied it under magnifying lenses, analyzing the sapphire's inclusions, the cut, the metalwork, and the stylistic markers of Roman craftsmanship. Each detail was a testament to the skill of the ancient artisan, whose knowledge had traveled unbroken through millennia, reaching hands that could no longer know the original wearer. Through it all, the ring remained quiet, observing silently the march of human endeavor. Wars swept continents, dynasties rose and fell, cities were built and abandoned, yet the sapphire's calm brilliance persisted. It outlasted politics, ideology, and even language. Its message, though unspoken, was constant. The enduring nature of intention, the quiet authority of focus, the connection between human thought and material form. Imagine for a moment standing in a dimly lit gallery, the ring encased in glass. Visitors pass by, unaware of the depths contained within. The sapphire catches a stray beam of light, casting a blue shimmer onto the white walls. A child leans close, fascinated by the color. An art historian pauses, studying the cut and metalwork. The ring, centuries removed from its emperor, continues to influence perception. Its story persists not only in recorded history, but in the subtle ways it draws attention, inspires thought, and evokes reflection. Consider the lessons embedded in such an object. It teaches patience, centuries of survival, waiting for those who can understand its value. It teaches continuity, the same stone bridging the ancient world to the modern. It teaches subtlety. Power is not always loud, nor authority always announced. Sometimes the most profound influence is quiet, internal, and nearly imperceptible. The sapphire ring, worn once by a man both celebrated and feared, reminds us that history is carried not only in grand monuments or epic battles, but in the small, deliberate objects that survive the ages. The curve of metal, the polish of a gem, the intention of hands long gone, all these create a continuity that links generations across time. Even now, when the world rushes with noise and light, the ring's quiet legacy endures. Scholars and curators can examine, measure, and describe it, but the true experience of the ring is beyond mere words. It is the reflection of a human hand shaping history, the echo of intention traveling from palm to palm, century after century, the invisible yet undeniable presence of one of Rome's most notorious emperors, carried silently in a single gem. The sapphire glimmers as it did in the 1st century, untouched by the decisions of those who followed. Its color mirrors the vast sky over ancient Rome, the Mediterranean seas, and distant lands from which the gemstone first came. In the stillness of reflection, it conveys a story of power, patience, artistry, and the human need to mark existence with objects that endure. And so the ring waits, as it always has, a symbol, a witness, and a teacher. Its surface reflects not only the light around it, but the passage of centuries, the flow of civilizations, the continuity of human thought. The story of the emperor, the artisans, the travelers, and the modern observers is all contained within the cool depths of its sapphire heart. Through its journey, we see the interplay between human ambition and the objects that channel it. The ring embodies more than a title or a reign. It embodies the idea that influence, once manifested, can travel through centuries, touching lives far removed from its original context. The smallest artifacts can contain the largest lessons, and this sapphire, resting in its simple band, is a testament to the enduring power of human presence. And so, across centuries, from Caligula's hand to modern display, the ring holds its quiet dominion. The gaze it commands is not of fear or cruelty alone, but of reflection, understanding, and connection. It reminds us that objects, like people, can transcend their time, carrying within them the essence of thought, intention, and the subtle authority of presence. And there you have it, 15 of the most fascinating artifacts the world has ever kept hidden, each holding stories older than we can imagine. Thank you for joining us on this journey through unearthed secrets. If you enjoyed this adventure, please subscribe, give a like, and share where you're watching from. Until next time, let the whispers of history guide your curiosity and imagination.